The gallows stood stark against the Arizona sky, a wooden monument to frontier justice. July heat shimmered off the dusty ground of Silver Creek's town square as a crowd gathered in the shadow of the scaffold. Men removed their hats despite the scorching sun. Women clutched handkerchiefs to their lips. Children who should have been shooed away watched wide-eyed from their parents' sides. Levi Reed's boots scraped across rough-hewn planks as the guards marched him forward. Rope burns circled his wrists where manacles had been replaced with twine. A man's final journey required no iron, just hemp for his hands and neck. Sweat trickled down his temple, cutting a clean path through dust and dried blood. At 45, Levi had long ago accepted that his death would come violently. He just never expected it would come with an audience. From atop his horse, Judge Vernon Blackwood's voice carried across the square like thunder rolling over distant mountains. Silver-haired and immaculate in his black coat, despite the heat, he projected the very image of law in a lawless land. Levi Reed Blackwood intoned, unfolding a parchment with deliberate ceremony, "You have been tried and convicted of the willful murder of 3 citizens of this territory. For these heinous crimes, you are sentenced to hang by the neck until dead." Levi's gaze swept the crowd. Faces blurred together, a sea of strangers come to witness justice, or what passed for it in Silver Creek. His eyes caught on a young woman at the edge of the gathering. Unlike the others, her face wasn't twisted with morbid fascination. She watched him with purpose, her red-brown hair partially hidden beneath a worn hat, green eyes fixed on his with unsettling intensity. The noose descended rough hemp, scratching against his weathered skin as the executioner adjusted it with practiced hands. The hood was offered, but Levi shook his head. He would face death with open eyes. "Any last words before the sentence is carried out?" Blackwood asked the perfunctory question, delivered with bored indifference. Levi's voice, unused for days in his cell, emerged as a rasp that grew stronger with each word. "There are secrets worth dying to keep," he said, gaze fixed on Blackwood, "and secrets worth living to reveal." A flicker of something concerned, perhaps even fear, crossed Blackwood's composed features before disappearing behind his mask of authority. He nodded curtly to the executioner. "May God have mercy on your soul." The trapdoor lever creaked as it was pulled back. Levi took a final breath of the scorching desert air. A crack split the silence. Not the snap of a breaking neck, but the sharp report of a rifle. The rope above Levi's head severed, sending him crashing through the trapdoor to land hard on his knees beneath the gallows. Pain shot through his legs, but instinct took over. Screams erupted as the crowd scattered. From the chaos, the red-haired woman appeared beside him, a knife flashing as she cut his bonds. "Run," she hissed, pulling him to his feet. More shots rang out. The executioner fell from the platform, clutching his shoulder. Blackwood's horse reared, nearly throwing its rider. The woman yanked Levi toward a waiting paint horse, its reins tied loosely to a hitching post. With strength that belied her slender frame, she helped push him into the saddle before swinging up behind him. Her arms reached around to grab the reins, and she drove her heels into the horse's flanks. They thundered away from the gallows down the main street and past the last buildings of Silver Creek. Bullets kicked up dust at their heels, but the horse was swift, and the shots grew wild as distance stretched between them and their pursuers. The horse's hooves beat a desperate rhythm as they fled across the sun-baked earth, the town receding behind them. Only when Silver Creek had disappeared beyond the horizon did the woman ease their pace, guiding them off the main trail and into the rugged foothills that marked the beginning of the Superstition Mountains. Neither spoke until they traveled for hours, following game trails and dry creek beds, doubling back across rocky ground that would leave no tracks. The sun was beginning its descent when they finally reached a small cabin nestled in a hidden canyon surrounded by gnarled juniper trees and the red rock walls that would shield them from view. "Get inside," the woman ordered as she dismounted, her voice leaving no room for argument. The cabin was small but solid, built to withstand both weather and unwelcome visitors. A single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. Gun ports disguised as small windows would allow defenders to hold off a small army if needed. Once inside, the woman barred the door and moved to the window, scanning the approach before drawing heavy shutters closed. Only then did she turn to face Levi, her hand resting on the revolver at her hip. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the shutters. Levi shook his head, his throat still raw from the noose that had so nearly claimed his life. "Should I?" "No." She moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a canteen which she tossed to him. "But I know you, Levi Reed, former sheriff from Colorado, widower, father, man with a particular interest in suspicious hangings across 3 territories." Levi drank deeply, the tepid water feeling like salvation on his parched throat. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, eyes never leaving the woman. "You have me at a disadvantage, miss." "Davidson, Eleanor Davidson. She removed her hat, releasing a cascade of auburn hair that fell past her shoulders. Though most call me Ellie, her voice hardened, daughter of Peter Davidson, who Judge Blackwood hanged 1 year ago for horse thieving. Recognition flickered in Levi's eyes. Davidson, I remember reading about that case. He studied her more carefully now. Your father wasn't a horse thief. No, she agreed, a bitter smile touching her lips. He wasn't, just like you aren't a murderer of 3 innocent men. She moved to the fireplace, striking a match to kindle a small fire that would produce little smoke. The evening chill was already seeping into the cabin despite the lingering heat of the day. How did you know it where I'd be? Levi asked, settling into one of the chairs, his body suddenly feeling every mile of hard travel and the abuse it had suffered in Silver Creek's jail. Because you're on the list, Ellie replied simply, as if that explained everything. Just like my father was. She stirred the small flames. I've been tracking you for months, ever since I realized what you were investigating. I nearly caught up to you in Prescott, but Blackwood's men got to you first. The list, Levi repeated. What list? Ellie rose, brushing dust from her riding skirt. Her eyes, when they met his, were the green of desert sage after rain, a color that spoke of life persisting against all odds. The list of people who've gotten too close to the truth about Judge Vernon Blackwood and what he's really doing in these territories. She crossed her arms. The list of people who've discovered what happened to the real lawmen who were supposed to bring justice to these parts. Levi leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been piecing it together for 3 years. Judges, marshals, sheriffs, across Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Colorado, all connected somehow. Men of the law who aren't serving it. Ellie nodded. My father called them the Dawn Society. He was gathering evidence against them when they came for him. The name sent a cold shock through Levi's body despite the growing warmth from the fire. The Dawn Society, he murmured. I've heard whispers of that name. Seen their mark. A rising sun with 13 rays, Ellie said. Yes. Levi's hand unconsciously moved to his chest where beneath his shirt lay a small scar in that very pattern. A brand burned into his flesh the night his world had ended. The night that had set him on this path. Sleep came reluctantly to Levi that night, his body exhausted, but his mind racing with questions. He had insisted Ellie take the bed while he made do with a bedroll on the floor near the fireplace. Now, as moonlight filtered through the cracks in the shutters, he stared at the ceiling, memories surfacing like bubbles in dark water. 8 years had passed since the night fire had devoured his home in Colorado, taking Martha and little Clara with it. 8 years since he'd returned from tracking a gang of cattle rustlers to find his life reduced to smoldering ruins. The local authorities had called it a tragic accident, a lamp overturned perhaps, or a chimney fire that spread too quickly. But Levi had known better. The pattern of the burn, the missing valuables, the strange tracks leading away from the property. Most damning of all had been the brand on his chest delivered while he lay unconscious after being struck from behind as he desperately searched the burning house for survivors. He'd woken miles away, dumped in a ravine like garbage, the strange sunburst patterns seared into his flesh. He'd spent the next 3 years as sheriff of Eagle County, searching for answers, following whispers and rumors of corruption that reached into the highest offices of territorial justice. Then the frame-up 3 bodies discovered on his property, men he'd never seen before, and suddenly Levi Reed was no longer the law, but a fugitive from it. Since then, he'd traveled the territories under assumed names, taking odd jobs, always listening, watching, gathering scraps of information about judges and lawmen who seemed more interested in acquiring land and wealth than dispensing justice. Men like Vernon Blackwood. You're still awake, Ellie's voice came softly from the darkness. She sat up in bed, her silhouette visible against the faint moonlight from the window. Old habits, Levi replied. Hard to sleep soundly when you've had a price on your head for 5 years. Silence stretched between them for a moment. Tell me about your father, Levi said finally. He heard her shift settling back against the wall behind the bed. Peter Davidson was the most honest man I ever knew, she began. Came west after the war with nothing but a mule and the clothes on his back. Built our ranch acre by acre, head of cattle by head of cattle. Her voice carried a warmth when she spoke of him that contrasted sharply with the bitterness that edged her other words. He taught me everything: how to ride, shoot, track, survive. Pride colored her tone. Said a woman alone in these territories needed to be twice as capable as any man. He raised you alone, Levi asked. My mother died birthing me. I never knew her except through his stories. She paused. What about your family? I heard you had a wife and daughter back in Colorado. The question cut like a knife, but Levi had long ago learned to bear such wounds without flinching. Martha and Clara, he said quietly. Martha was a school teacher before we married. Smartest woman I ever knew. Clara was just 7 when the fire took them. I'm sorry, Busto. Ellie offered the words simple but sincere. It was no accident. Levi continued staring into the dying embers of the fire. I was getting close to something as sheriff, looking into land deals that didn't add up, judges ruling against homesteaders in favor of mining interests that had no legal claim. His hand drifted again to the scar on his chest. Someone decided I needed to be stopped. The Dawn Society, Ellie supplied. Yes, though I didn't know the name then. He sat up, feeding a small stick into the coals. After the fire, after I was forced to run, I started hearing whispers, connecting patterns across territories. Homesteaders and ranchers found hanged for crimes they didn't commit. Land suddenly changing hands. Mines discovered on properties that had just been seized. The stick caught fire, casting Levi's weathered face in sharp relief, highlighting the scar that ran along his jawline, another souvenir from the night of the fire. What did your father discover that got him killed? He asked. Ellie was quiet for so long that Levi thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. He found out who's really running the Dawn Society. And he discovered what happened to the federal marshals who were sent to investigate corruption in the territories 3 years ago. She paused. The ones who disappeared without a trace. Levi's breath caught. Those disappearances had been the catalyst for his own investigation, 5 U.S. Marshals vanishing within months of each other, all while looking into allegations of corruption among territorial judges. Blackwood, Levi guessed. Blackwood is part of it, Ellie confirmed, but he's not the head. My father believed there was someone above him, someone with connections in Washington. What evidence did your father have? Documents, letters, a ledger with names, dates, payments. She shifted on the bed, and a list of people marked for death. People who knew too much or asked too many questions. Where is this evidence now? Even in the dim light, Levi could see Ellie's smile, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. That's what Blackwood wants to know. Dawn broke over the canyon rim, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. Levi stood outside the cabin, coffee cup in hand, surveying the rugged landscape. The Superstition Mountains lived up to their name, a maze of canyons and ridges that could swallow a man whole. A fitting place to hide. The sound of the cabin door brought his attention back. Ellie emerged dressed in riding clothes, her hair tied back in a practical braid. In the morning light, Levi could see her more clearly, the high cheekbones, the determined set of her jaw, the tiny scar that nicked her right eyebrow. Young, but with eyes that had seen too much. We need supplies, she said without preamble. And I need to check if my contact in town has any news. Town, Levi frowned. Silver Creek will be crawling with Blackwood's men looking for us. Not Silver Creek. There's a settlement called Miners Rest about 10 miles east of here. Little more than a trading post and saloon, but the owner, Thomas Holloway, was a friend of my father's. Levi considered this. Holloway, the apothecary. Surprise flickered across Ellie's face. You know him? Know of him. His name has come up in my investigations. Former Army surgeon during the war, if I recall correctly. Ellie nodded. He runs the only pharmacy for 50 miles. Treats everything from snake bites to gunshot wounds, no questions asked. She hesitated. He's been helping me track Blackwood's activities. Can he be trusted? With my life, she replied, without hesitation. He's the one who helped me get the rifle to the execution. Levi's hand unconsciously went to his throat where a ring of bruised flesh marked his close call with the hangman's noose. Then I owe him my thanks. They saddled the paint horse together, working in companionable silence. As Ellie checked the cinch, Levi found himself studying her movements, efficient, practiced, nothing wasted. She handled herself like someone far older than her years. You're not what I expected, he admitted. She glanced up, a hint of amusement crossing her features. What did you expect, a weeping daughter seeking revenge? Something like that, Levi acknowledged with a slight smile. I did my weeping the day they hanged my father, Ellie said, her voice suddenly hard. Since then, I've been focused on finishing what he started, which is exposing the Dawn Society for what it is, a criminal enterprise masquerading as justice. She swung up into the saddle with practiced ease. Are you coming or staying? Levi mounted behind her, acutely aware of the awkward intimacy of sharing a horse with a woman he barely knew. Lead on, Miss Davidson. They rode in silence for a time, following game trails through the rocky terrain. The heat built as the sun climbed higher, but in the shadow of the mountains the air remained tolerable. Levi found his thoughts drifting to Martha, to the life they'd built and lost. It had been years since he'd ridden with a woman, felt the subtle shift of another person's weight against him. Your father, he said, finally breaking the silence. When did he first encounter the Dawn Society? Ellie kept her eyes on the trail ahead. About 3 years ago, a neighboring rancher was found hanged for allegedly stealing cattle. My father knew the man knew he was honest, started asking questions. Dangerous questions? Yes. She guided the horse around a boulder blocking the narrow path. He noticed a pattern. Small ranchers and homesteaders accused of crimes, quick trials, quicker hangings. Their land sold at auction for a fraction of its worth, always to the same few buyers. Shell companies for mining interests, Levi guessed. Exactly. He started keeping records, gathering evidence. Then about a year and a half ago, he met with a U.S. Marshal who'd been sent to investigate. Which one? Levi interrupted, suddenly alert. Marshal James Cooper. Levi's breath caught. Cooper had been the third marshal to disappear. What happened? They met twice. The second time my father gave him documents, proof of Blackwood's corruption. 3 days later, Cooper vanished. Ellie's voice remained steady, but Levi could feel the tension in her shoulders. A week after that, my father was arrested for horse thieving. He was hanged 2 days later. The familiar pattern made Levi's blood run cold. Quick accusations, quick trials, quicker executions. The Dawn Society's method for silencing threats. I'm sorry, Soam, he said, the words feeling inadequate. It's not your apology I want, Ellie replied, her tone leaving no doubt whose apology she did want and how it would be delivered. They rode on the terrain, gradually becoming less rugged as they approached the foothills. By mid-morning, they caught sight of Miner's Rest, a dusty collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads. Unlike Silver Creek with its pretensions of civilization, Miner's Rest was nakedly utilitarian, a general store, a saloon, a livery, and a few scattered cabins. The only building that showed any real care was a small structure with a neat sign proclaiming T. Holloway, Apothecary and Physician. We'll approach from the back, Ellie said, guiding their mount through a stand of cottonwoods that would shield them from casual observation. Thomas has a room behind his shop where we can talk privately. They dismounted in a small clearing behind the apothecary, tethering the horse where it could graze on the sparse grass. Ellie led the way to a back door, knocking in a pattern that suggested a prearranged signal. The door opened to reveal an elderly man with thinning white hair and spectacles perched on a prominent nose. Despite his age, Levi guessed at least 70, Thomas Holloway stood straight as a ramrod, his blue eyes sharp and alert. Eleanor, he greeted, genuine warmth in his voice. His gaze shifted to Levi, narrowing slightly. And Mr. Reed, I presume. You're looking remarkably alive for a hanged man. Thanks to your assistance, I understand, Levi replied, extending his hand. Holloway took it with a firm grip. Come inside quickly. Blackwood's men passed through here yesterday asking questions. The back room of the apothecary was part storeroom, part living quarters. Shelves lined the walls filled with jars of herbs, powders, and tinctures. A small bed occupied one corner, a workbench another. A pot of coffee simmered on a small stove. Sit, Holloway invited, gesturing to a pair of chairs beside a small table. You both look like you could use some coffee and a hot meal. As Holloway busied himself with cups and plates, Levi took the opportunity to study the man more closely. Despite his age and profession, Holloway moved with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to action. The slight bulge beneath his waistcoat suggested he wasn't relying solely on his medical skills for protection. What news from town? Ellie asked as Holloway set steaming cups before them. Blackwood's in a fury, the old man replied with grim satisfaction. Put a $500 bounty on both your heads, dead or alive, though I suspect he'd prefer dead. Any word on how many men he's sent after us? Levi asked. His deputy, Randall Curtis, is leading the search with 6 men. Holloway's expression darkened. Curtis is a butcher with a badge, served with Quantrill's raiders during the war if rumors are true. Levi nodded grimly. The Missouri guerrillas had been known for their brutality. What about telegraph communications? Ellie asked. Has Blackwood reached out to other territories? He sent wires to every sheriff and marshal within 100 miles. Holloway poured himself a cup of coffee and sat with them. But that's not the most interesting news. Both Levi and Ellie leaned forward slightly. A stranger arrived in Silver Creek last night. Well-dressed gentleman from back east traveling with 2 hired guns. Went straight to Blackwood's office, stayed for hours. Holloway sipped his coffee. My source in town says Blackwood looked shaken after the meeting. Did your source catch a name? Levi asked. Henderson, William Henderson, representing Eastern Investment Interests. Holloway's eyes met Levi's. But my source has seen this man before under a different name. In Denver 3 years ago. A cold feeling settled in Levi's stomach. Around the time the marshals started disappearing. Precisely. Ellie set down her cup with deliberate care. Thomas, we need to show him. The old man hesitated, then nodded, rising stiffly from his chair. He moved to the workbench, sliding aside a wooden panel to reveal a hidden compartment. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound journal. Peter entrusted this to me before. Before the end, Holloway said, his voice suddenly heavy with grief. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe until the right time. He handed the journal to Ellie, who took it with reverent care before passing it to Levi. This is part of what got my father killed, she said softly. The evidence he gathered against the Dawn Society. Levi opened the journal, finding pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Dates, names, locations, transactions, all meticulously documented. Peter Davidson had been thorough in his investigation, recording land seizures, suspicious deaths, connections between seemingly unrelated events. But what caught Levi's attention was a folded paper tucked between the final pages. He opened it carefully, revealing a list of names with dates beside them. Some of the dates had passed and others lay in the future. Beside each name that had passed was a small, neat check mark. His own name was there, L. Reed, 7/15/85, yesterday's date, and near the bottom a notation that made his blood run cold, ED 8/15/85, exactly 1 month from now. Ellie Davidson was scheduled to die in August. This is a death list, Levi said quietly, looking up from the paper. Holloway nodded grimly. Peter found it among papers in Blackwood's office during a burglary last year. It's what convinced him the Dawn Society was behind the disappearances of the federal marshals. Levi scanned the names again. There near the top, J. Cooper, 10/12/82, Marshal James Cooper, with a check beside his name. These other names, Levi tapped the paper, the ones with checks, all dead, all hanged or found dead under suspicious circumstances. Ellie confirmed. Every single one. Levi's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle he'd been assembling for years alone. The Dawn Society isn't just corrupting justice for profit. They're systematically eliminating anyone who might expose them. Yes, Holloway agreed. And judging by the arrival of this Henderson character right after your escape, I'd say they're concerned their operation is at risk. Levi turned to the final page of the journal. There, in a different hand than the rest, hastily scrawled, rather than neatly printed, was a short note. If you're reading this, I'm likely dead. The Dawn Society reaches higher than I imagined. The map to the complete evidence is with R. She knows what to do. God help us all. PD. Levi looked up questioningly. Holloway and Ellie exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Rebecca, Ellie said after a moment. My stepmother. Levi's surprise must have shown on his face, for Ellie's expression hardened slightly. You assumed I was alone after my father's death, she said. That suited our purposes. Rebecca Martinez, Holloway explained. Peter's second wife, though they kept their marriage quiet. Mexican-American woman with family connections south of the border. Blackwood's kind don't take kindly to such unions. Where is she now? Levi asked. Safe, Ellie replied, offering nothing more. And so is the rest of my father's evidence. Before Levi could press further, the front bell of the apothecary jingled. Holloway rose quickly, signaling for silence. Stay here, he whispered, straightening his waistcoat before heading through the door to the shop front. Levi moved silently to the connecting door, positioning himself to hear the conversation in the next room. Thomas Holloway, a deep voice drawled. Just the man I was looking for. Deputy Curtis, Holloway's voice remained steady. What brings you to my humble establishment? Headache powder liniment for that bad shoulder of yours? Information, Curtis replied, his tone carrying a threat beneath its surface cordiality. About escaped prisoners and the people who might be helping them. I'm afraid I don't follow news of the law much these days, Holloway said. My concerns are with ailments of the body, not failures of the justice system. A heavy thud suggested Curtis had slammed his hand on the counter. Don't play dumb with me, old man. You and Davidson were thick as thieves before he got what was coming to him. Now his daughters helped a condemned murderer escape the gallows. A shocking development, Holloway replied, his voice betraying no emotion. But I fail to see what it has to do with me. Judge Blackwood seems to think you might know where they're hiding, Curtis said, and the judge has good instincts about these things. Beside the door, Levi felt Ellie tense. His hand moved to the revolver Holloway had provided him, but he kept it holstered. Starting a gunfight in the middle of town, even a small settlement like Miners Rest, would only make their situation worse. I haven't seen Eleanor Davidson in months, Holloway said, his voice convincingly regretful. Not since I treated her for a fever last winter. As for this Reed fellow, I wouldn't know him if he walked through my door this minute. The lie was delivered with such perfect sincerity that Levi almost believed it himself. For your sake, I hope that's true, Curtis said. Judge Blackwood is not in a forgiving mood. $500 for information leading to their capture. $1,000 if they're brought in dead. A substantial sum, Holloway observed neutrally. Indeed. The floorboards creaked as Curtis apparently moved around the shop. What's this you're working on? Willow bark extract for pain and fever. And these letters here, Levi tensed again. What letters? Correspondence with medical suppliers in Denver. Holloway replied smoothly. I'm running low on certain essential medicines. A long pause followed, during which Levi imagined Curtis scrutinizing the letters, looking for any sign of deception. Very well, Curtis said finally. But know this, Holloway, if I discover you've been harboring fugitives or passing information, you'll hang right alongside them. I've always been a law-abiding citizen, Holloway replied, his tone unchanged. The bell jingled again and heavy footsteps receded. A moment later, Holloway reappeared in the doorway, his composed facade cracking to reveal genuine concern. Curtis is sharper than he looks, the old man said, closing the door behind him. He's suspicious, but I don't think he knows you're here. We should move, Levi said. Your help has put you at risk. Holloway waved away his concern. I've been at risk since I agreed to help Peter Davidson expose the Dawn Society. At my age, what's a little more danger? Ellie rose, placing a hand on the old man's arm. Thomas, we need to know what's in the rest of my father's evidence, what Rebecca is protecting. Holloway's expression grew grave. It's not just documents, Eleanor. It's names. Names of every member of the Dawn Society in 3 territories, including their leader. And who is their leader? Levi asked, though something in his gut told him he already knew the answer. A man your investigation has likely already identified, Holloway said, studying Levi's face. Former Judge William Henderson of the Colorado Territorial Court. The name hit Levi like a physical blow. Henderson had presided over the inquest into the fire that killed Martha and Clara. Henderson had declared it an accident, despite Levi's insistence otherwise. Henderson had later signed the warrant for Levi's arrest when the 3 bodies were found on his property. Henderson, Levi breathed, old rage rekindling. He's here in Silver Creek now. Yes, Holloway confirmed, and his presence suggests the Dawn Society is worried. Your escape has forced them to meet in person rather than through their usual channels. This is our chance, Ellie said, her eyes bright with fierce determination. With both Henderson and Blackwood in one place, we could expose the entire operation. Or get ourselves killed, trying, Levi cautioned. Sometimes those are one and the same, she replied. Holloway moved to a cabinet, unlocking it with a key he kept on a chain around his neck. From inside, he withdrew a worn leather map case. Peter left this with me as well, he said, unrolling a detailed map of the territory on the table. He marked locations of importance, places where the Dawn Society has seized land, locations of hidden mines, meeting spots. Levi leaned over the map, recognizing many of the marked locations from his own investigations. But one mark in particular caught his eye, a small X in the Superstition Mountains labeled simply evidence. Is that where, he began? Yes. Ellie cut him off. That's where Rebecca has hidden everything. Holloway's fingers traced a route on the map. It's an abandoned silver mine. The Spanish worked it briefly in the 1700s before Apache raids drove them out. Most people think it's played out worthless. But it's not, Levi guessed. No. Holloway confirmed. Peter discovered the mine still contains a rich vein of silver. The Dawn Society doesn't know about it yet, but they've been buying up land all around it. It's only a matter of time. Ellie's expression was grim. That's why my father was killed. Not just because of what he knew about the Dawn Society, but because our ranch bordered that mine. When he refused to sell, Blackwood had him framed and hanged, Levi finished. A heavy silence fell over the room as the full scope of the conspiracy began to take shape in Levi's mind. This wasn't just about corrupt officials enriching themselves. This was systematic theft and murder on a scale that spanned multiple territories, orchestrated by men sworn to uphold the law. We need to retrieve that evidence, Levi said finally. Get it to federal authorities outside the Dawn Society's influence. Easier said than done, Holloway replied. The nearest honest federal marshal I know of is in Tucson, and the route there passes through territory Blackwood controls. Then we don't use the routes Blackwood would expect, Ellie said, tracing a different path on the map. We go through Apache land. Levi raised an eyebrow. That's risky. My father maintained good relations with the local bands, Ellie explained, traded fairly with them when others cheated them. They might grant us safe passage. It's our best option, Holloway agreed. But first you need to reach the mine and secure the evidence. The old man rolled up the map, returning it to its case before handing it to Levi. Take this. I've memorized what I need to know. Thomas, Ellie began, but Holloway shook his head. I'm safer not having it, Eleanor. Curtis will be back, and next time he might not be satisfied with my explanations. The gravity of their situation settled over them like a shroud. They were 3 people, an old apothecary, a woman, and a falsely accused murderer against a powerful organization with the law itself at its disposal. We should leave before dark, Levi said, glancing out the small window at the afternoon sun. Make distance while we can. Holloway nodded, moving to gather supplies. Take these, he said, offering a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Food, medicine, ammunition. He paused, then added, and this. From a drawer, he produced a silver badge, a U.S. Marshal star, tarnished with age, but still gleaming where the light caught it. Marshal Cooper's, Holloway explained. Peter recovered it after Cooper disappeared. Thought it might be important evidence someday. Levi took the badge, its weight substantial in his palm. Thank you. As Holloway helped them prepare to leave, Levi found himself studying the old man more carefully. Something about his manner, the way he moved, the precision of his speech, suggested a history beyond that of a simple country doctor. You were more than just my father's friend, weren't you? Ellie asked suddenly, voicing the question forming in Levi's mind. Holloway paused in his preparations, a shadow crossing his weathered features. Your father was the finest man I ever knew, he said softly. But no, our connection wasn't just friendship. He straightened, meeting Ellie's gaze directly. I was one of the founding members of the original Dawn Society 30 years ago, before Blackwood, before Henderson, when our purpose was to bring real justice to these territories, not pervert it. The revelation hung in the air like gunsmoke after a shot. You're part of the Dawn Society. Levi's hand drifted toward his gun. Was Holloway corrected firmly? I left when I saw what they were becoming. When men like Henderson began using our connections for personal gain rather than justice. Why didn't you tell me? Ellie asked, hurt evident in her voice. Your father knew, Holloway replied. He sought me out because of my past association, asked me to help him gather evidence against those who had corrupted our original purpose. He turned away, gazing out the window at the dusty street beyond. I owe it to Peter to see this through, to make amends for what the society has become. The sincerity in the old man's voice was unmistakable. Whatever his past, Thomas Holloway was committed to their cause now. A soft knock at the back door interrupted the tense moment. Holloway moved quickly to answer it, hand on the small revolver in his waistcoat pocket. He relaxed visibly when he saw who stood there. Samuel, he breathed, relief evident in his voice. A young man slipped inside, closing the door quickly behind him. Tall and lean like Holloway, with the same sharp blue eyes, he carried himself with the cautious alertness of someone accustomed to danger. Father, he greeted Holloway with a quick embrace before turning to the others. Miss Davidson? He nodded to Ellie before his gaze settled on Levi. And you must be Reed. My son Samuel, Holloway explained. He's been gathering information in Silver Creek. Samuel removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked prematurely with gray. Dirt smudged his face and his clothes were travel-worn. I came as soon as I could. Blackwood's men are everywhere. They've set up checkpoints on every road out of the county. What about Henderson? Levi asked. Still in town. He and Blackwood have been meeting behind closed doors all day. Samuel's expression darkened. Whatever they're planning, it's big. I overheard talk of a large shipment coming in from Mexico tomorrow night. Weapons, Ellie suggested. Or men, Levi added. Either way, it suggests they're preparing for something significant. Samuel nodded agreement. There's more. Curtis has ordered wanted posters with your descriptions distributed to every settlement within 50 miles. They're offering $1,000 for each of you, dead or alive. Holloway's face grew grim. They're desperate to silence you before you can expose them. Then we need to move now, Levi decided, gathering the supplies Holloway had prepared. Get to the mine, secure the evidence, and find a way to get it to federal authorities. Samuel exchanged a look with his father. I can create a distraction, draw some of Blackwood's men away from the mountain trails. It's too dangerous, Holloway objected. No more dangerous than what you're doing by harboring fugitives, his son countered. Besides, I have friends in the mining camps who'll help, men who've lost claims to Blackwood's corrupt rulings. The determination in the younger Holloway's voice was familiar to Levi, the same resolve he'd heard in Ellie's tone, the same commitment he felt himself. The Dawn Society's corruption had created unlikely allies united by a common cause. As they finalized their plans, Levi found himself watching Ellie. She stood straight-backed and focused, the grief-stricken daughter, now transformed into a formidable woman with purpose. In her, he recognized something of himself, the way tragedy could forge a person into either a weapon or a shield. Ellie had become both. Night was falling as they prepared to depart. Holloway provided them with a second horse, a sturdy bay gelding that Samuel had ridden to town, giving them greater speed and maneuverability. They would travel under cover of darkness, using the mountain paths that Ellie knew well from childhood explorations with her father. As Levi checked the cinch on his saddle, Samuel approached, speaking in a low voice. There's something you should know about Henderson, he said, glancing toward Ellie to ensure she couldn't overhear. He asked specifically about you after your escape, not just as a fugitive, but by name. He seemed disturbed that you were involved. Levi paused in his work. Henderson and I have history. He presided over the inquest into my family's deaths. It's more than that, Samuel insisted. He called you the ghost that wouldn't stay buried. Said you were supposed to have died 3 years ago. A chill ran through Levi despite the warm evening air. The pieces shifted in his mind, forming a new pattern. His supposed death had been planned scheduled just like the others on the list they'd found. Thank you for telling me, Levi said quietly. Samuel nodded once, then moved away to help his father with the remaining preparations. When all was ready, they gathered at the back door of the apothecary. The stars were emerging in the darkening sky, offering enough light to travel by without revealing their position to distant observers. God go with you, Holloway said, clasping Ellie's hands in his own before turning to Ives. Bring her back safely. I will, Levi promised, the words feeling like an oath. As they mounted their horses and prepared to ride, Samuel called softly after them. 3 days, he said. If you haven't returned in 3 days, we'll assume the worm and move forward with what evidence we have. Ellie nodded her understanding. 3 days. With that, they nudged their horses forward, melting into the gathering darkness. Behind them, Miner's Rest grew small and then disappeared altogether as they climbed into the foothills of the Superstition Mountains. Ahead lay the abandoned mine with its hidden evidence and the truth about the Dawn Society that had destroyed so many lives, including Levi's own. The path would be dangerous, but for the first time in years, Levi felt something beyond the cold determination that had driven him since losing Martha and Clara. He felt hope, a faint hope, fragile as a desert bloom, but hope nonetheless that justice might finally be possible, that the ghosts of the past might finally find peace. Night wrapped around them like a familiar cloak as they rode deeper into the Superstition Mountains. The waning moon cast just enough light to illuminate the trail without betraying their position to any watchful eyes below. Levi followed Ellie's lead, trusting her knowledge of these treacherous paths where a misstep could send horse and rider plummeting into darkness. They rode in silence, each lost in private thoughts. The revelations at Holloway's shop had shifted something fundamental in their precarious alliance. What had begun as a chance encounter, a condemned man and his unlikely savior, had transformed into something far more complex. Their fates, Levi realized, had been intertwined long before Ellie cut him down from the gallows. After 2 hours of steady climbing, they reached a small plateau, sheltered by towering rock formations. Ellie reined in her horse, dismounting with fluid grace. We'll rest the horses here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a spring behind those rocks. Levi slid from his saddle muscles, protesting after the long ride. They worked together to unsaddle and water the horses, their movements synchronized despite having known each other for barely a day. How much farther to the mine, Levi asked as they settled against a boulder, sharing dried beef and hard biscuits from Holloway's provisions. 3 hours, maybe 4. Ellie gazed up at the star-scattered sky. We should reach it before dawn if we push on soon. Levi nodded, taking a sip from his canteen. Your father chose the location well. Difficult to access, easy to defend. He was always thinking ahead. A small smile touched her lips, gone almost before it formed. Said it was the only way to survive out here, anticipate trouble before it finds you. Wise man. He would have liked you, Ellie said suddenly. Said he always knew the measure of a man by how he handled himself when everything was taken from him. The words hung between them, acknowledging the loss they shared, different circumstances, but the same profound emptiness left by loved ones stolen too soon. Tell me about Rebecca, Levi said, changing the subject. Your stepmother. When did your father marry her? Ellie was quiet for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. 5 years ago, she finally answered. I was 23, already helping run the ranch. He met her in Tucson during a cattle sale. She was working as a seamstress. Mexican, you said? Mexican-American. Her father crossed the border during the war with Mexico, settled in Arizona territory. Ellie brushed crumbs from her lap. She made my father happy after years of loneliness. That was enough for me. Does Blackwood know about her? No, they kept their marriage quiet. On paper, she was just our housekeeper. Ellie's voice hardened. After they hanged my father, she disappeared. Blackwood's men assumed she'd fled back to Mexico. They never suspected she was carrying half of my father's evidence. And the other half was in the journal we saw today, Levi concluded. Yes, my father didn't trust anyone with a complete picture, not even me. She pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly looking younger than her 28 years. He said knowledge was like dynamite, useful in the right hands, deadly in the wrong ones. Levi studied her profile in the moonlight, noting the determined set of her jaw, the watchful eyes that missed nothing. Yet he trusted you to finish what he started. He didn't have a choice, she replied simply. I was all that was left. They fell silent again, the vast wilderness around them, seeming to listen to their conversation. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the lonesome sound echoing off canyon walls. "We should move on," Levi said, finally gathering their sparse belongings. "Cover as much ground as possible before daylight." They saddled the horses and continued their journey, climbing higher into the mountains. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file along precipitous ledges. Below them, the desert floor stretched out like a dark sea, pinpricks of light, marking distant settlements. "Silver Creek." Ellie pointed to a cluster of lights to the west, and there she indicated a solitary glow far to the south. "Miners' Rest." Levi's gaze was drawn to the lights of Silver Creek, where Henderson and Blackwood were even now plotting their next moves. The man who had presided over the inquest into his family's deaths, who had signed the warrant for his arrest, who had orchestrated the corruption that had destroyed so many lives, so close, yet still beyond his reach. "Henderson," Levi said, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. "How did your father connect him to the Dawn Society?" "Letters," Ellie replied, keeping her eyes on the treacherous path ahead. "Correspondence between Blackwood and Henderson discussing land acquisitions, mining rights payments to certain officials. Henderson never signed his real name, but my father recognized the handwriting from court documents. Clever man. Too clever for his own good in the end." They rode on the trail, eventually widening as they entered a high valley nestled between jagged peaks. Juniper and pinon pines dotted the landscape, their scent sharp in the cool mountain air. Here, sheltered from the worst of the desert heat, life found purchase in the rocky soil. As they crossed the valley floor, Levi noticed Ellie repeatedly glancing over her shoulder, scanning the path behind them. "You see something?" he asked, hand moving instinctively to his revolver. "Not sure," she admitted. "Thought I caught movement on the ridge we passed an hour back. Could be nothing, mountain lion maybe." "Or Blackwood's men," Levi suggested grimly. "Possibly, but they'd need a local guide to navigate these trails at night, and most locals know better than to enter the superstitions after dark." Superstition. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "These mountains have a reputation. The Apache believe malevolent spirits dwell here. Spanish explorers called this range Monte Superstición after losing an entire expedition in these canyons." "You don't strike me as superstitious, Miss Davidson." "I respect the mountains," she corrected. "They don't forgive mistakes." They continued across the valley, alert for any sign of pursuit. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. They needed to reach the mine before full daylight exposed them to any watching eyes. "There," Ellie said, suddenly pointing to a dark shadow in the cliff face ahead. "The old Spanish mine." The entrance was almost invisible, half hidden by brush and fallen rocks, deliberate camouflage, Levi suspected, rather than natural overgrowth. As they drew closer, he noted the careful arrangement of stones that appeared random, but would channel rainwater away from the opening, preventing erosion that might expose the entrance to casual observation. They dismounted, leading the horses the final 100 yards. Up close, the mine entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance wide enough for a loaded mule train to pass through, testament to the extensive operation the Spanish had once conducted here. "We'll leave the horses inside just past the entrance," Ellie said, her voice hushed in the pre-dawn stillness. "There's a small cavern with a water source. They'll be safe there while we go deeper." Levi nodded, helping her clear away enough brush to lead the horses inside. The entrance tunnel sloped gently downward, the air growing noticeably cooler as they moved away from the outside world. After about 30 paces, the tunnel opened into a modest cavern with a small, clear pool fed by a spring that trickled from the rock wall. They unsaddled the horses, ensuring they could drink and graze on the sparse vegetation that grew near the water. From their saddlebags, Ellie produced 2 lanterns, lighting one and handing it to Levi. "From here we go on foot," she said, adjusting her gun belt. "The main shaft runs about 500 yards into the mountain before it branches." The Spanish followed silver veins in 3 directions, but the richest deposits were in the eastern tunnel. "And that's where the evidence is hidden." She nodded. "In the deepest chamber, behind a false wall my father constructed. The Spanish left certain sections unexplored, believing them cursed after several cave-ins. My father used one of these supposedly cursed chambers as his hiding place." Levi raised an eyebrow. "Clever." "He was always good at using people's fears against them," Ellie said with a hint of pride. The local miners refused to go near that section, making it the perfect hiding spot. With lanterns casting long shadows before them, they moved deeper into the mountain. The main shaft was well constructed, its walls and ceiling reinforced with massive timber supports weathered by centuries but still solid. The floor was relatively smooth, worn down by countless mule carts and boots. As they walked, Levi studied the rock walls, noting the glittering veins of quartz and occasional flecks of darker mineral. "Your father mentioned silver," he said, "but there's more here, isn't there?" Ellie glanced at him, impressed by his observation. Gold, she confirmed. Not in large veins like the silver, but rich enough. The Spanish missed it, focusing on the more visible silver deposits. And Blackwood doesn't know? No, not yet. But he and his Dawn Society friends have been systematically acquiring land throughout these mountains. It's only a matter of time before they discover what my father found. They reached a junction where the main shaft split into three separate tunnels. Ellie led them into the rightmost passage, the eastern branch she had mentioned. This tunnel was narrower, the ceiling lower, forcing Levi to duck his head in places. The Spanish were smaller men, Ellie explained, noticing his discomfort. My father had the same problem. After another 100 yards, they came to an area where the tunnel showed signs of a collapse. Rocks and debris partially blocked the path, leaving only a narrow passage. This is where the curse supposedly began, Ellie said, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. 3 Spanish miners died here when the ceiling gave way. After that, they avoided this section entirely. She held her lantern higher, illuminating a small opening to their left that would have been easy to miss if you weren't specifically looking for it. Through here, she said, squeezing through the gap. Levi followed, finding himself in a small chamber with a surprisingly high ceiling. Unlike the carefully constructed main tunnels, this space was largely natural, a cavern that the Spanish miners had stumbled upon but apparently abandoned. Ellie moved to the far wall, running her hands over the rock surface with practiced movements. Her fingers found a nearly invisible seam, and she pressed against a specific spot. A section of the wall, perhaps 3 feet square, moved inward with the grating sound of stone against stone. My father's handiwork, she explained, setting down her lantern to pull the stone panel aside, revealing a dark space beyond. He discovered this natural chamber by accident while exploring the abandoned sections. Decided it was the perfect vault. She reached into the darkness, withdrawing a metal strongbox about the size of a small trunk. It took both of them to maneuver it out of the hidden compartment and into the center of the chamber. The box was iron-heavy and sturdy, with a complex lock mechanism that would have challenged even the most skilled locksmith. Ellie removed a key from a chain around her neck, inserting it into the lock with reverent care. My father gave me this key the night before he was arrested, she said softly. Made me promise I wouldn't use it unless he... She swallowed hard. Unless he couldn't. The lock opened with a solid click. Ellie hesitated, her hand resting on the lid, as if opening the box would somehow make her father's death more final. Then, with a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, neatly organized, lay the fruits of Peter Davidson's dangerous investigation. Ledgers bound in leather bundles of letters tied with string, land deeds, maps marked with annotations, and a journal similar to the one they had seen at Holloway's shop, but considerably thicker. All of it. Ellie breathed a mixture of relief and sadness in her voice. Everything he collected over 3 years. Levi carefully lifted one of the ledgers, opening it to reveal page after page of meticulous records, names, dates, property transactions, payments. The scope of the Dawn Society's operations was laid bare in columns of precise handwriting. Your father documented everything, Levi said, impressed by the thoroughness of the evidence before them. He was determined to bring them to justice through the law, Ellie replied, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. He believed in the system even after seeing how corrupted it had become. Levi set the ledger aside, picking up a bundle of letters. The correspondence between Blackwood and Henderson was coded, but transparent enough once you understood their methods. They discussed acquisitions and removals with the casual indifference of men accustomed to power without accountability. This is enough to hang them both, Levi said carefully, returning the letters to the box. If we can get it to honest authorities. A significant if, Ellie remarked, examining another document. The Dawn Society's influence extends farther than we initially thought. She handed him a map of the Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado territories. Red marks indicated towns and settlements throughout the region with names written beside each mark. Levi recognized many of the names: judges, sheriffs, mayors, all members or associates of the Dawn Society. Their network is vast, Ellie continued. My father believed they have connections in Washington as well, protecting them from federal oversight. Every conspiracy has weak points, Levi countered. Men like Henderson and Blackwood inspire fear, not loyalty. When facing prison or the gallows, their associates will turn on them. He was about to elaborate when a sound from the tunnel outside the chamber caught his attention, a small displacement of rock, the kind made by a careful footstep. Levi extinguished his lantern with a swift movement, signaling Ellie to do the same. Darkness enveloped them instantly, absolute and disorienting. Levi drew his revolver, moving silently to position himself between Ellie and the chamber entrance. They waited, barely breathing, straining to hear over the pounding of their own hearts. Another sound closer now, the unmistakable scrape of a boot on stone. Someone had followed them to the mine. Levi raised his revolver, aiming at the chamber entrance, where any intruder would have to silhouette themselves against the faint light from the main tunnel. Beside him, he sensed rather than saw Ellie drawing her own weapon. A shadow darkened the entrance, and Levi's finger tightened on the trigger. "Eleanor," a woman's voice called softly. "Eleanor, are you there?" Ellie's sharp intake of breath was audible in the darkness. "Rebecca," she answered, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. Levi kept his weapon trained on the entrance as a figure moved into the chamber. "Light the lantern," he instructed Ellie, "but keep it low." The match flared, illuminating a woman of perhaps 50, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a severe bun. Handsome rather than beautiful, with proud features and intelligent eyes that assessed Levi with open suspicion. "Rebecca," Ellie confirmed, lowering her gun and moving forward to embrace the older woman. "How did you find us?" "Thomas Holloway sent word that you were coming for the evidence," Rebecca Martinez replied, her accented English precise and deliberate. "I've been watching the mine for 2 days, making sure Blackwood's men hadn't discovered it." Her gaze returned to Levi, still wary. "This is the man Holloway mentioned, the one who escaped the gallows." "Levi Reed," Ellie confirmed. "He's helping me expose the Dawn Society." "For what purpose?" Rebecca asked bluntly, addressing Levi directly. "Revenge, justice. There's a difference, senor." Despite the circumstances, Levi found himself respecting the woman's directness. "Both," he admitted, "though lately I'm less certain where one ends and the other begins." Rebecca studied him for a moment longer before giving a single sharp nod, as if his honesty had satisfied some internal criteria. "We have little time," she said, turning back to Ellie. "Blackwood's men are combing the mountains. A group passed within half a mile of here, just before dawn, heading toward the old Apache Trail." "How many?" Levi asked. "6 riders, heavily armed." Rebecca moved to the strongbox, surveying its contents with a practiced eye. "You've opened it. Good. We need to divide the evidence, make multiple copies of the most important documents." "Divide it?" Ellie questioned. "Why not take it all to Tucson now?" "Because we may not all reach Tucson," Rebecca replied matter-of-factly. Peter believed in redundancy. If one messenger falls, others must continue. The stark pragmatism of her statement silenced any further objections. They set to work using the small writing desk that had been hidden alongside the strongbox. Rebecca produced paper, ink, and pencils from a satchel she carried, and they began the painstaking process of copying key documents and organizing the evidence into 3 separate packages. As they worked, Levi found himself increasingly curious about Rebecca Martinez. Her methodical efficiency and strategic thinking spoke of experience beyond that of a simple seamstress or rancher's wife. "You were more than just Peter Davidson's wife," he observed during a pause in their labors. Rebecca's hands stilled momentarily over the document she was examining. "Everyone is more than just one thing, Senor Reed," she replied without looking up. "You were more than just a sheriff before fire took your family." The accuracy of her knowledge about his past was unsettling. "Holloway told you about me." "Some," she acknowledged. "The rest I'd pieced together myself. It is a skill I developed long ago." "As what?" he pressed. Rebecca finally met his gaze, her dark eyes unreadable. "Before I met Peter, I worked for people who needed information, sometimes from across borders, sometimes from places where women could go unnoticed when men could not." "A spy," Levi concluded. "An informant," she corrected. "For the Union Army during the war, and later for certain interests in Mexico and the United States who benefited from knowing what happened on both sides of the border." Ellie looked up from her copying, surprise evident on her face. "You never told me this." "Your father knew," Rebecca said simply. "It was his choice not to share it with you. He wanted to protect you from certain knowledge that might put you at risk. And now circumstances have changed." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "Peter hoped you would never need to know the full extent of the Dawn Society's reach or operations. He wanted a different life for you than this constant danger." "He should have known me better," Ellie replied, a hint of reproach in her voice. "He knew you would follow this path if given the choice." Rebecca countered. "That is precisely why he tried to shield you from it." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound that reverberated through the mine shaft, a horse's whinny from the direction of the entrance. Levi was on his feet instantly, revolver in hand. "Someone's found the horses." Rebecca moved with surprising speed, gathering the documents they had sorted and shoving them into 3 separate oilskin pouches. "We need to leave. Now." "There's another way out," Ellie said, already closing the strongbox and pushing it back into its hiding place. "A ventilation shaft the Spanish constructed. It emerges about a quarter-mile south of the main entrance, higher up the mountain." "Will it accommodate us?" Levi asked, helping to conceal any evidence of their presence. "It will be tight, but yes." Ellie secured the hidden door, ensuring it blended seamlessly with the surrounding rock face. My father and I explored it thoroughly. Rebecca distributed the document pouches, keeping one for herself and giving the others to Ellie and Levi. If we're separated, head for Tucson. Find Marshal James Sullivan at the Federal Building. He was a friend of Peter's, one of the few lawmen we're certain isn't compromised. Ellie extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness once more. This way, she whispered, taking Levi's hand to guide him toward the rear of the chamber, where a narrow opening led to another passage. They moved swiftly but cautiously, Ellie leading them through the labyrinthine tunnels with confident steps despite the darkness. Behind them, voices echoed from the direction of the main shaft, men calling to each other as they penetrated deeper into the mine. The ventilation shaft was as narrow as Ellie had implied, a tight vertical chimney that would require climbing rather than walking. Rough handholds and footholds had been carved into the rock by the Spanish miners, centuries before, worn smooth by time, but still serviceable. I'll go first, Ellie whispered. Rebecca next, then you, Levi. Once we're outside, we'll need to move quickly. There's little cover near the exit. Levi nodded, though the gesture was invisible in the darkness. Go. He could hear Ellie's movements as she began to climb, followed soon after by Rebecca. The voices from the main tunnel grew louder. Blackwood's men methodically searching each branch of the mine. When Rebecca was safely started up the shaft, Levi began his own ascent. The handholds were uncomfortably small for his larger hands, and more than once he felt his boots slip on the smooth depressions meant for feet. The shaft seemed endless, a vertical journey through solid rock, with only the occasional brush of his shoulders against the walls to remind him he wasn't falling through infinite darkness. After what felt like an eternity, his hand reached up to find empty air, rather than the next handhold. A moment later, Ellie and Rebecca were helping pull him through the narrow opening onto the mountainside. The contrast between the absolute darkness of the mine and the bright morning sunlight was momentarily blinding. Levi blinked rapidly, his vision gradually adjusting to reveal a precarious ledge overlooking a steep ravine. The ventilation shaft's exit was partially concealed by scrub brush, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. We need to move, Rebecca urged, already scanning the terrain for the best escape route. They'll figure out we use the shaft once they find the chamber empty. Our horses are still in the mine, Levi pointed out. We have alternatives, Rebecca replied, gesturing toward a stand of juniper trees about 50 yards along the ledge. I brought 3 horses. They're hidden there. Ellie looked at her stepmother with newfound respect. You really did anticipate everything. Your father taught me well, Rebecca answered, a flash of grief crossing her features before being replaced by determination. Now come, we have no time to waste. They made their way carefully along the narrow ledge, keeping low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. The juniper grove provided welcome cover, and there, tethered and waiting, were 3 horses, sturdy mountain ponies accustomed to the difficult terrain. As they mounted, a shout from below confirmed their escape had been discovered. Looking down, Levi spotted 2 riders emerging from the mine entrance, pointing up toward the ventilation shaft's exit. They've seen us, he warned, drawing his revolver. No time for a firefight, Rebecca said sharply. We split up as planned. 3 targets are harder to pursue than 1. Ellie's face showed clear reluctance at the idea of separation. We should stay together. Your father's evidence must reach Tucson, Rebecca insisted. That is the priority. Everything else, including our lives, is secondary. The hard truth of her words hung in the crisp mountain air. After a moment, Ellie nodded, her expression hardening into resolve. I'll take the eastern route through Apache Pass, she decided. I know it best. I'll go south, then west, Rebecca said. Draw them toward Mexico before doubling back. Levi considered the terrain, the pursuing riders, their limited options. I'll head north, then cut east through Connors Ravine. It's more direct to Tucson, but they'll expect us to take the longer, safer routes. Below them, more riders had joined the first 2, fanning out to begin scaling the slope toward their position. 3 days, Rebecca confirmed. Whoever reaches Tucson first waits 3 days for the others before acting. They clasped hands briefly, a silent promise passing between them. Then, with a final nod, they separated 3 riders heading in 3 different directions, each carrying a piece of the truth that could destroy the Dawn Society. Levi drove his heels into his mount's flanks, urging the animal north along a game trail that wound through dense pine forest. Behind him, shouts and the crack of rifle fire indicated Blackwood's men had spotted their departure and were in pursuit. The mountain pony proved its worth, navigating the difficult terrain with sure-footed confidence. Levi leaned low over its neck, presenting a smaller target as he rode hard, putting distance between himself and the pursuers. A bullet splintered bark from a tree inches from his head, but the shot had been fired from too great a distance to be accurate. After 15 minutes of hard riding, the sounds of pursuit faded. Either Blackwood's men had divided their forces to follow all 3 fugitives, Or they had chosen to focus on Ellie or Rebecca instead. Neither possibility offered much comfort. Levi slowed his horse to a more sustainable pace, conserving the animal's strength for the long journey ahead. The document pouch pressed against his side beneath his coat, a constant reminder of what was at stake. The evidence it contained was enough to hang Blackwood, perhaps even Henderson, but only if it reached Marshal Sullivan in Tucson. The morning stretched into afternoon as Levi navigated the mountainous terrain, always alert for signs of pursuit. He crossed several streams, riding through the water for 100 yards or more each time to obscure his trail. When the opportunity presented itself, he backtracked and took alternate routes, employing every trick he had learned in his years as a lawman and fugitive. By late afternoon, he had reached Connor's Ravine, a narrow passage between towering cliffs that would provide the most direct route toward Tucson. The ravine was notorious for flash floods and ambushes feared by most travelers, which made it perfect for Levi's purposes. Few would expect anyone to willingly enter such a dangerous passage. As he guided his horse down the steep trail into the ravine, movement on the ridge above caught his eye. A lone rider silhouetted against the sky, watching. Not one of Blackwood's men, they would never expose themselves so carelessly. This was someone else, someone familiar with the land and confident enough to travel alone in these treacherous mountains. The figure raised a hand in what might have been greeting or warning before disappearing over the ridge. Apache Levi guessed, remembering Ellie's mention of her father's good relations with the local tribes. Whether friend or foe remained to be seen. The ravine floor was cool and shadowed, the towering walls blocking the afternoon sun. A shallow stream trickled down the center of the passage, evidence of recent rains higher in the mountains. Levi kept his horse to the edges, where the footing was more secure, one hand resting on his revolver as he scanned the cliffs above for any sign of threat. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft clop of his horse's hooves and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Too quiet, Levi realized the hairs on the back of his neck rising. In a living canyon, there should be the rustling of small animals, the songs of birds, the buzz of insects. This unnatural silence meant only one thing: predators were near. He drew his revolver, every sense alert for danger. The attack, when it came, was swift and nearly silent. A lasso dropped from above, settling around his shoulders before being yanked tight, pulling him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs, his revolver spinning from his grasp. Before he could recover, men were on him, 3, perhaps 4, their faces obscured by bandanas. Not Blackwood's men, who would have announced themselves with gunfire. These attackers worked with practiced efficiency, binding his wrists before dragging him to his feet. The documents, one of them demanded his accent thick, but his English clear enough. Where are they? Levi remained silent, assessing his captors. Mexican bandits, he guessed, or perhaps deserters from the Mexican army turned outlaws. Their clothes were desert-worn, their weapons a mix of old military rifles and newer American revolvers. Search him, the apparent leader ordered. Rough hands patted him down, finding and removing the oilskin pouch hidden inside his coat. The leader took it, opening it to examine the contents with a frown of concentration. These are the papers, he asked, holding up one of the documents. Levi said nothing, mind racing to understand the situation. These men hadn't stumbled upon him by accident. They had been waiting specifically for someone carrying documents. Who sent you? Levi asked, his voice rough from exertion and the fall. The leader studied him for a moment before responding. Someone who pays well for information about Judge Blackwood and his associates. Blackwood has many enemies, Levi observed. Which one hired you? A thin smile appeared beneath the man's bandana. The kind who prefers to remain anonymous, senor. One of the other men muttered something in Spanish, too quick for Levi to catch with his limited knowledge of the language. The leader nodded in response. My associate makes a good point, he said, returning his attention to Levi. We were told to expect a woman, possibly 2. Instead, we find you. Interesting. So they had been waiting for Ellie or Rebecca, not him. Someone knew about the evidence in the mine and had hired these men to intercept it, but who? Not Blackwood or Henderson, who would have sent their own men with orders to kill. Someone else then, a third player in this dangerous game. Where are the women? The leader pressed. Gone, Levi replied simply, taking different routes. With more documents like these. Levi's silence was answer enough. The leader tucked the pouch into his own coat, then gave instructions to his men in rapid Spanish. 2 of them moved to secure Levi's horse, while another kept a rifle trained on him. You will come with us, senor, the leader announced. Our employer will want to speak with you directly. And if I refuse, the man shrugged, then we leave your body for the coyotes and collect half our payment instead of full. The choice is yours. Given the circumstances, it wasn't much of a choice at all. Levi allowed himself to be hoisted onto his horse, his hand still bound but now tied to the saddle horn. The leader mounted his own horse while the others followed on foot, leading them deeper into the ravine. As they traveled, Levi considered his options. These men were professionals unlikely to be careless enough to allow an easy escape. His best chance would be to discover who their employer was and why they wanted Peter Davidson's evidence. If their interest truly was in exposing the Dawn Society rather than protecting it, he might find an unlikely ally. The ravine eventually widened into a small box canyon, invisible from the main passage. Here, a camp had been established, several tents, a corral for horses, even a small cook fire carefully positioned to minimize smoke. About a dozen men moved about the camp, all armed, all with the same professional bearing as his captors. They brought Levi to the largest tent where the leader dismounted and gestured for him to do the same. With his hands bound, dismounting was awkward, but he managed it without falling. The leader cut the rope, securing him to the saddle horn, but left his wrists tied. "In there," he ordered, gesturing toward the tent entrance. "Our employer is waiting." Levi ducked through the opening, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light inside. The tent was spartanly furnished, a folding desk, 2 chairs, a cot in the corner. Maps and papers were spread across the desk, illuminated by a small oil lamp. Standing beside the desk was a man Levi had never expected to see again. Tall and distinguished despite the dust of travel on his clothes, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. The same man who had presided over the inquest into the deaths of Martha and Clara. The same man who had signed Levi's arrest warrant, William Henderson. Sheriff Reed Henderson greeted him as calmly as if they were meeting on a street in Denver, rather than in a hidden canyon after Levi's abduction. Or should I say, the late Sheriff Reed, reports of your death appear to have been premature. Levi's shock quickly gave way to cold fury. "Henderson, I should have known." "Yes, you should have," Henderson agreed, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Please sit. We have much to discuss and little time." Levi remained standing, eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed his life. "The only thing I want to discuss is how slowly you'll hang when I get Davidson's evidence to Tucson." Henderson sighed, a sound of genuine weariness rather than theatrical exasperation. "I see Eleanor Davidson has filled your head with certain assumptions about me and my role in recent events." He moved to pour water from a canteen into 2 tin cups. "Some of those assumptions may even be correct, but not in the way you imagine." He offered one of the cups to Levi, who ignored it. Henderson set it on the desk instead, taking a drink from his own cup before continuing. "The Dawn Society is real, Levi. Its corruption is real. The murders, the land theft, the perversion of justice, all real." Henderson's eyes, when they met Levi's, held unexpected intensity. "But I am not its master. I am its most dedicated enemy." The claim was so outrageous that Levi actually laughed, a harsh sound in the confined space. "You expect me to believe that after everything you've done, I expect you to listen," Henderson replied evenly. "After that, you can decide what to believe." He moved to the desk, retrieving the oilskin pouch that Levi's captors had delivered. Peter Davidson was a good man, honest, determined, courageous. When he began investigating the Dawn Society, I reached out to him, offered my help. "Your signature is on the warrant that saw him hanged," Levi pointed out coldly. "My forged signature," Henderson corrected. "Just as my forged signature appears on your arrest warrant and on dozens of other official documents authorizing the Dawn Society's crimes." He opened the pouch, removing several of the papers inside. "Look at these closely, Levi. Really look at them." Despite his skepticism, Levi found himself stepping forward to examine the documents Henderson had spread on the desk. They appeared to be letters between Henderson and Judge Blackwood discussing land acquisitions and removals of problematic individuals, including Peter Davidson. "My signature," Henderson said, pointing to the bottom of one letter, "and here and here." He then retrieved another document from a drawer in the desk, a bank draft with his signature. "Now compare them." Levi studied the signatures with a lawman's trained eye for detail. The differences were subtle but unmistakable: the pressure of the pen strokes, the angle of certain letters, the flow of the writing. Someone had done an excellent job of forgery, but it was forgery nonetheless. "A clever fake proves nothing," Levi said, unwilling to relinquish his certainty so easily. "You could have written these different intentionally to create deniability." "True," Henderson acknowledged, "which is why I've spent the last 3 years gathering evidence against the real leader of the Dawn Society, the man who has been systematically destroying the justice system in these territories while using my name and reputation as cover." He pulled another document from the desk drawer, a wanted poster. The face illustrated on it was hauntingly familiar to Levi, like looking at his own reflection, but subtly wrong, as if in a distorted mirror. "Daniel Reed," Henderson said softly, "your twin brother, the man everyone believed died in the war, but who instead returned to build the Dawn Society using knowledge and connections he gained during Reconstruction." The revelation hit Levi like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Daniel, his brother, his twin, his other half, had indeed enlisted in the Union Army when Levi had chosen to remain behind as a deputy sheriff. News of Daniel's death at Gettysburg had nearly destroyed Levi, but he had eventually accepted it, mourned, and moved on. That's impossible. Levi managed, though, even as he spoke the words, connections were forming in his mind. The strange familiarity he'd sometimes sensed in the Dawn Society's methods, the feeling that he was fighting an enemy who knew his every move before he made it. I wish it were, Henderson replied, genuine regret in his voice. When I discovered the truth, I could scarcely believe it myself, but the evidence is irrefutable. He produced more documents, military records, banking transactions, witness statements, building a case that Daniel Reed had not died at Gettysburg but had been grievously wounded, his identity confused with another soldier. After a long recovery, he had used the opportunity of being legally dead to reinvent himself, eventually emerging in the Western Territories under various aliases. The fire that killed your wife and daughter, Henderson continued, his voice gentle but relentless, was not meant to silence you. It was meant to recreate you, to forge you into a weapon like himself. Daniel believed that your shared loss would drive you to join him once you understood his vision for true justice in the West. Memories flooded Levi's mind, the mysterious brand on his chest after the fire, the sunburst pattern with 13 rays, the symbol of the Dawn Society. He branded me, Levi whispered, the horror of realization washing over him. My own brother marked me like cattle. As he marks all members of the inner circle, Henderson confirmed. When you rejected his offer, when you continued to uphold the law instead of embracing his perversion of it, he had you framed for murder. Levi's legs suddenly felt unable to support him. He sank into the chair Henderson had offered earlier, mind reeling with implications. Daniel is alive. He said the word strange on his tongue after so many years of believing otherwise. And he's behind everything, the Dawn Society, the murders, the corruption. Yes, Henderson said simply. He uses Blackwood and others as his public face while he remains in the shadows, directing operations across 3 territories. Few have ever seen him in his true identity, those who have rarely lived to speak of it. Why are you telling me this? Levi asked, looking up at the man he had hated for so long. Why now? Henderson's expression hardened. Because Daniel is preparing something unprecedented. The shipment coming from Mexico that Samuel Holloway overheard mentioned, it's not goods, it's men. 40 hired guns, former Confederate soldiers turned mercenaries being brought in to eliminate the last obstacles to the Dawn Society's complete control of the Arizona Territory. He spread a map on the desk indicating key locations. In 3 days, they planned to simultaneously strike at every independent law enforcement officer, newspaper editor, and influential citizen who might oppose them. A night of coordinated assassination that will leave the territory effectively under Daniel's control. The scale of the plan was breathtaking in its audacity and horror. And you've been working against him all this time? From the shadows, yes, Henderson confirmed. After I discovered my identity was being used to authorize his crimes, I realized I could do more good by allowing him to believe his deception was working. It gave me access to information. Why not go to federal authorities? I tried. The first 3 U.S. Marshals I contacted disappeared murdered on Daniel's orders before they could act. That's when I realized how far his influence reached. Henderson's face showed the strain of years spent in a dangerous double game. I've been building a case, gathering allies, waiting for the right moment to strike. Levi studied the man before him, reassessing everything he thought he knew. If Henderson was telling the truth and the evidence suggested he was, then Levi had spent years hating the wrong man, while his own brother orchestrated the destruction of everything he had sworn to protect. Eleanor Davidson and Rebecca Martinez, Levi said, suddenly remembering his separated companions. They're riding into danger believing you're the enemy. My men are searching for them, Henderson assured him, but Daniel's forces are also in pursuit, and they vastly outnumber us. Levi stood, decision made. Cut me loose. I need to find them before Blackwood's men do. Henderson hesitated only briefly before producing a knife and slicing through the ropes binding Levi's wrists. There's more you need to know, Levi. About Daniel, about the fire, about what really happened that night. Tell me while we ride, Levi replied, already moving toward the tent entrance. We're wasting time. Henderson nodded, gathering the most essential documents and stowing them in a saddlebag. One thing you should know immediately, he said, voice lowered despite the privacy of the tent. Your daughter Clara, there's evidence she may have survived the fire. Levi froze, hand on the tent flap, heart suddenly pounding so hard he could hear it. What did you say? Daniel's personal journals, Henderson explained, which my agents recovered last year. They mention a child rescued from the fire taken to be raised by loyal society members. He met Levi's stunned gaze directly. I believe that child was Clara. The world seemed to tilt beneath Levi's feet, possibility and hope crashing through him like a flash flood through a dry arroyo. Clara alive, the thought was too overwhelming to fully comprehend, where he managed to ask the single word containing a universe of questions. I don't know for certain, Henderson admitted, but Daniel keeps detailed records of everyone in his organization. If Clara is alive, if she's with society members, those records will tell us where. And those records are where? In Daniel's private office in Silver Creek, in the back room of Judge Blackwood's courthouse. The irony was almost too perfect, the answers Levi had sought for 8 years, the possibility of his daughter's survival, hidden in the very heart of his enemy's stronghold, the same courthouse where he had nearly been hanged the day before. First, we find Ellie and Rebecca. Levi decided, forcing himself to focus on the immediate threat rather than the tantalizing possibility Henderson had dangled before him. Then we deal with Daniel and Blackwood. Henderson nodded agreement. We'll take 10 men. The rest will continue searching for your companions along the likely routes to Tucson. As they emerged from the tent into the late afternoon sunlight, Levi felt a strange sense of clarity, despite the storm of emotions raging within him. For 8 years, he had pursued justice for his family, driven by grief and rage. Now, with the possibility that Clara might be alive, with the knowledge that his own brother was behind the corruption he had fought, the nature of his quest had fundamentally changed. This was no longer just about justice or revenge. It was about redemption, about family, about reclaiming what had been taken from him through deception and violence. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they mounted their horses. Soon darkness would fall over the mountains, bringing with it new dangers, but also the cover they would need to move undetected. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, Ellie and Rebecca were fighting their own battles, carrying pieces of the truth that could bring down the Dawn Society. And somewhere, perhaps not as far away as he had believed for 8 long years, his daughter might be waiting, not knowing her father was alive, not knowing he had never stopped searching for justice, never stopped loving her. Levi Reed rode out of the Box Canyon with William Henderson at his side, an alliance he could never have imagined 24 hours earlier. Behind them followed men loyal to Henderson's cause, hard-eyed professionals prepared for the dangerous mission ahead. Before them lay uncertainty, danger, and the faint glimmer of hope that had been absent from Levi's life for too long. Night was falling over the Superstition Mountains, and with it the promise of reckoning. Darkness had claimed the mountains by the time Levi Henderson and their small force set out. Stars glittered overhead like scattered diamonds on black velvet, providing just enough light to navigate the treacherous trails. They rode in silence, each man absorbed in his own thoughts, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves on stone and the occasional call of a nightbird. Levi's mind churned with revelations. Daniel alive. His twin brother, once his closest companion, his mirror image, his other half, now his greatest enemy. The architect of destruction that had claimed Martha, perhaps spared Clara, and left countless others dead across 3 territories. How had the boy who had shared his childhood, who had wept with him at their mother's funeral, who had stood beside him as best man at his wedding, become this monster in Clara? The possibility that his daughter might be alive sent waves of conflicting emotions crashing through him, desperate hope warring with the fear of false promise. For 8 years he had carried her death like a stone in his chest. To allow himself to believe she might be alive was to risk shattering anew if that hope proved false. "You're wondering if I'm telling the truth," Henderson said quietly, guiding his horse alongside Levi's. "About your daughter." Levi glanced at him, the man's face half hidden in shadow. "I'm wondering why you'd wait until now to tell me." "Would you have believed me yesterday," Henderson countered, "when you thought I was behind your family's deaths?" The honest answer was no, and both men knew it. "There's something else you should know," Henderson continued after a moment. "About Eleanor Davidson." Levi tensed, suddenly alert. "What about her?" "She may not be who you think she is." Henderson's voice remained low, ensuring their conversation wouldn't carry to the men riding behind them. Peter Davidson had no biological children. Eleanor was his ward, a child he took in after finding her orphaned during his time as a cavalry scout. The revelation was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. It explained certain inconsistencies. Levi had noted Ellie's reference to being 23 when her father married Rebecca 5 years ago, making her 28. Now yet Peter Davidson had supposedly lost his wife in childbirth, which would make Ellie considerably younger. "Did Rebecca confirm this?" Levi asked. Henderson nodded. "She was forthcoming once she understood I wasn't her enemy. Eleanor's real name is Eleanor Kincaid. Her parents were settlers killed in an Apache raid when she was 3. Davidson found her hiding in the ruins of her family's cabin and raised her as his own." "Why would Ellie hide this?" "I don't believe she's hiding it deliberately. According to Rebecca, Davidson never told her she wasn't his biological daughter. He simply raised her as his own, allowed her to believe she was born to him and his late wife. Levi considered this new information, trying to determine its significance. Why tell me this now? Henderson hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because there may be more connections here than any of us realized. Daniel's journals mention a Kincaid family massacred near Fort Bowie around 1860. He took particular interest in the case because a child's body was never found. The implication hung in the air between them. You think Daniel knows who Ellie really is? Levi said slowly. I think it's possible, Henderson replied. And if he does, if there's some connection between them, it might explain the intensity of his interest in her and Davidson's evidence. They lapsed into silence again, the trail demanding their full attention as it wound along a precipitous ledge. Levi's thoughts turned to Ellie, her fierce determination, her unwavering commitment to justice for her father. Whether she was Davidson's daughter by blood or by love made no difference to her devotion to the man who had raised her. But if Daniel had some special interest in her identity, it added another layer of danger to her current situation. How do we find them? Levi asked as they reached more level ground. Ellie and Rebecca could be anywhere in these mountains. My men reported Apache movement along the eastern passes earlier today, Henderson answered. If Eleanor took that route as she planned, she may have encountered them. Rebecca was heading south. My scouts are already searching those trails. And if Blackwood's men found them first, Henderson's expression hardened in the moonlight, then we'll know. Daniel doesn't waste time with prisoners when it comes to threats of this magnitude. The blunt assessment sent a chill through Levi that had nothing to do with the night air. He urged his horse forward, pushing the pace as much as the difficult terrain would allow. Each passing hour increased the danger for Ellie and Rebecca and diminished the chance of stopping Daniel's plot before it unfolded. They rode through the night, navigating by stars in Henderson's surprising familiarity with the mountain trails. Near dawn, they reached a vantage point overlooking a broad valley. Henderson called a brief halt, producing a brass spyglass to survey the terrain below. Smoke, he said after a moment, passing the glass to Levi. 2 o'clock near that stand of cottonwoods along the creek. Levi focused the glass where indicated, making out a thin tendril of smoke rising against the lightening sky. Campfire, or the remains of one, Henderson agreed. Too small for a raiding party, too careful for ordinary travelers. One of Henderson's men, a weathered Mexican scout named Vargas, studied the valley with narrowed eyes. There is movement, he said softly, by the water's edge. They descended cautiously, approaching the location in a wide arc that utilized available cover. As they drew closer, Levi detected the acrid scent of burnt wood and something else, the metallic tang of blood. The small clearing beside the creek showed signs of a recent struggle. The remains of a campfire smoldered in its ring of stones, while nearby dark stains marred the sandy soil. A canvas pack lay torn open, its contents scattered. A single brass cartridge casing gleamed in the early morning light. Vargas dismounted, examining the ground with practiced eyes. 4 riders approached from the south, he reported, indicating barely visible tracks. 2 people were here already, 1 left blood behind. He moved carefully around the site, reading the story written in trampled grass and disturbed earth. There was fighting, then all 6 rode away together, heading east. 6, Levi questioned. 2 captives and 4 captors. Vargas nodded. The blood trail suggests one was wounded, but not badly. They were able to ride. Henderson knelt to examine a piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush, a scrap of dark blue cotton with intricate embroidery along one edge. Rebecca's, he confirmed grimly. This is from her shawl. Levi surveyed the scene, reconstructing the ambush in his mind. Rebecca and possibly Ellie had stopped to rest, perhaps believing themselves safe after a night of hard travel. Blackwood's men had found them. There had been resistance. The spent cartridge confirmed that. And then they had been taken, one of them wounded. The blood, Levi said, turning to Vargas. Can you tell? He couldn't finish the question. The scout understood nonetheless. Not fatal, he assured Levi. Too little for a serious wound. Perhaps a bullet graze or knife cut. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. They're taking them to Silver Creek, Henderson said with certainty. To Daniel. That's where he'll want the evidence and the people who know too much about it. Levi's jaw tightened. Then that's where we're going. It's what he'll expect, Henderson cautioned. Silver Creek will be heavily guarded, especially with the Mexican reinforcements arriving soon. I'm counting on it, Levi replied. All eyes will be on the southern approaches, watching for threats from outside. They won't be looking for danger already inside their walls. Henderson studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. A bold strategy, but how do you propose we enter a town where your face is known to every deputy and vigilant citizen after your escape from the gallows? A grim smile touched Levi's lips. The same way I've survived as a wanted man for 5 years, by becoming someone else. Silver Creek lay baking under the afternoon sun, its dusty streets quieter than usual. as citizens sought refuge from the heat in saloons and shops. From his vantage point on a ridge overlooking the town, Levi studied the changed landscape through Henderson's spyglass. In the 2 days since his near-hanging Blackwood and Daniel had transformed Silver Creek into an armed camp, men with rifles patrolled the rooftops of key buildings. Checkpoints had been established at each road leading into town. The courthouse Blackwood's domain, and likely where Ellie and Rebecca were being held, was particularly well guarded, with at least 6 men visible from Levi's position. "They're preparing for war," Henderson observed from beside him. "They're preparing for conquest," Levi corrected, collapsing the spyglass. "This is just the beginning." They retreated from the ridge to where their men waited with the horses in a sheltered draw. The transformation Levi had undergone during the past hours was remarkable. His beard had been shaved to reveal a face few in Silver Creek had seen clearly. His hair, normally worn long, had been cut short and darkened with coffee grounds. His clothes, the rough attire of a frontier lawman, had been exchanged for the neat suit and string tie of an Eastern businessman. Most importantly, he now wore an eye patch over his left eye, dramatically altering his appearance while providing a focal point that observers would remember instead of his actual features. "You're certain this disguise will work?" Henderson asked as they rejoined the group. "People see what they expect to see," Levi replied, adjusting his unfamiliar collar. "A one-eyed businessman from back east won't remind anyone of a shaggy-haired fugitive they glimpsed on the gallows." The plan they had formulated was dangerous but direct. Henderson would remain outside town with most of his men, positioning them to create a diversion when needed. Levi would enter Silver Creek alone, posing as a banking representative, interested in local mining investments, a common enough sight in frontier towns experiencing growth. Vargas would accompany him, playing the role of servant and translator, providing another pair of eyes and a second gun if things went wrong. Their goal was to locate Ellie and Rebecca, determine if they were still alive, and if possible, discover where Daniel kept the records that might lead to Clara. "Remember," Henderson said as they made final preparations, "Daniel doesn't know I've switched sides. If you're caught, if you're questioned, maintaining that deception could be our only advantage." Levi nodded, checking the derringer hidden in his boot and the small revolver concealed beneath his suit coat. "If we're not back by sundown, we'll come in shooting," Henderson promised. "Though I'd prefer a more subtle approach." "Subtlety is a luxury we may not have," Levi replied. "Not with Ellie and Rebecca's lives at stake. Not with what Daniel is planning." Henderson couldn't argue with that assessment. They clasped hands briefly, 2 men who had been enemies now united against a common threat. "Find them," Henderson said simply. "Find them and get out. Everything else is secondary." Levi and Vargas mounted their horses and began the descent towards Silver Creek, taking the main road that approached from the east. They rode openly, 2 travelers with legitimate business, nothing in their demeanor suggesting subterfuge. The checkpoint at the town's edge was manned by 2 deputies Levi didn't recognize, likely recent recruits to replace those who had died during his escape. They examined Levi's forged credentials with minimal scrutiny, more interested in the business that brought him to Silver Creek than in his identity. "Banking concerns," Levi explained in the clipped accent of an educated Easterner. "My employers have heard promising reports about the mineral deposits in this region." The explanation satisfied the deputies, who waved them through with directions to the Silver Creek Hotel, the only establishment in town suitable for a gentleman of business. The main street was familiar yet strange, seen now through the eyes of someone who had nearly died there. Levi kept his gaze forward, resisting the urge to look toward the courthouse square where the gallows had stood. Beside him, Vargas maintained his role perfectly, riding slightly behind, as a proper servant, with his expression appropriately deferential, while his eyes missed nothing. They stabled their horses at the hotel livery, checked into adjoining rooms, and established their presence as unremarkable visitors. Only then, with their cover secure, did they begin the real work of gathering information. Vargas went to the kitchen, where servants and workers would speak more freely. Levi made his way to the hotel bar, where alcohol loosened tongues and business was discussed without excessive caution. The saloon was busy despite the early hour, filled with miners, cowboys, and the various hangers-on that populated any frontier town. Levi ordered whiskey, sipping it slowly while listening to the conversations around him. The tension in Silver Creek was palpable, an undercurrent of anticipation and anxiety that manifested in louder than necessary laughter and frequent glances toward the Batwing doors. "First time in Silver Creek, Mr. the bartender," a heavy-set man with a walrus mustache polished a glass as he addressed Levi. "Indeed," Levi replied, maintaining his Eastern affectation. "I find it quite stimulating. There's an energy to these frontier towns that's lacking back east." The bartender snorted. "Energy's one word for it. Trouble's another. We've had our share lately." "Oh," Levi affected mild interest. Nothing that would concern investors, I hope. Depends on what you're investing in, the bartender replied cryptically, moving away to serve another customer. A well-dressed man at the end of the bar glanced over at this exchange. He wore a suit similar to Levi's but of finer quality, and his manner suggested authority. After a moment's consideration, he collected his drink and approached. "Forgive my intrusion," he said smoothly, "but I couldn't help overhearing you're here representing banking interests." Levi nodded, assessing the man carefully. "Harrison Phillips, First Bank of Boston." He introduced himself, offering the name on his forged papers. "James Wilson, Territorial Mining Commissioner." The man extended his hand. "I make it my business to welcome serious investors to our little corner of the territory." They shook hands, and Wilson took the stool beside Levi. His eyes were sharp beneath his pleasant expression, evaluating and calculating. "You've chosen an interesting time to visit Silver Creek, Mr. Phillips," Wilson remarked, sipping his brandy. "We're on the verge of significant developments in the region." "So I've heard," Levi replied noncommittally, though details have been scarce. Wilson smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Perhaps I could provide some clarity. My office maintains comprehensive records of all mining operations and opportunities in the territory. I'd be happy to share that information with a representative of such a prestigious institution." The offer was too convenient, too perfectly aligned with Levi's cover story. Suspicion flared, but he kept his expression interested and appreciative. "That's most generous, Mr. Wilson. When might we discuss these opportunities?" "No time like the present," Wilson suggested. "My office is just across the street in the courthouse. We could review the latest surveys now, if you're available." The courthouse, exactly where Levi needed to go, offered freely without him having to manufacture a reason. It felt like a trap, yet he couldn't afford to refuse such a perfect opportunity. "My servant is currently attending to some matters," Levi hedged. "Perhaps in an hour." Wilson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I'll expect you at 3 o'clock. He finished his brandy and stood. "The courthouse is the large brick building on the square. You can't miss it." "I look forward to our meeting," Levi replied, raising his glass in salute. As Wilson left the saloon, Levi considered the encounter. The mining commissioner had sought him out, specifically offered immediate access to the courthouse, and seemed unusually eager to share information with a stranger. Either Silver Creek was desperate for investment, or someone had recognized him despite his disguise. He needed to find Vargas and share this development. If they were walking into a trap, better to do so with open eyes and a prepared strategy. Levi left payment for his drink and made his way back through the hotel, locating Vargas in the kitchen yard, where he was sharing a cigarette with the hotel cook. At Levi's appearance, Vargas made his excuses and joined him in the narrow alley beside the hotel. "There is much talk," Vargas reported once they were alone. "Two women were brought in last night, taken to the courthouse. One was injured but walking. They are being held in the cells below the building." "Ellie and Rebecca," Levi confirmed grimly. "Any word on their condition?" "Alive for now. The judge wants something from them papers," the cook said. "They are to be questioned again tonight." Levi quickly shared his encounter with Wilson, describing the invitation to the courthouse. "It is too convenient," Vargas agreed, his weathered face creasing with concern. "But it may be our only chance to enter without force." "My thoughts exactly," Levi said. "I'll keep the appointment, see what I can learn about the layout where they're holding Ellie and Rebecca. You position yourself where you can watch the courthouse but remain unseen. If I don't emerge within 2 hours, get word to Henderson." Vargas nodded, his expression solemn. Both men understood the risks. If Levi was recognized, if this was indeed a trap, he might soon be joining Ellie and Rebecca in Blackwood's cells, or facing the gallows again, this time with no last-minute rescue. As 3 o'clock approached, Levi made his way across the town square toward the courthouse. The building dominated the center of Silver Creek, its red brick facade and white columns projecting an aura of law and civilization that belied the corruption within. Armed men stood guard at the entrance and patrolled the perimeter, their vigilance confirming Levi's suspicions that this was no ordinary government building, but the fortress of the Dawn Society. The gallows where he had nearly met his end had been dismantled. The square returned to its normal appearance, as if erasing the evidence of judicial murder. Yet as he crossed the space where the scaffold had stood, Levi felt the weight of the rope around his neck. Once more heard again the creak of the trapdoor lever being pulled. He pushed the memory aside, focusing on his role. Harrison Phillips, Boston banker, had no reason to feel unease in a courthouse. He climbed the steps with the confident stride of a man accustomed to moving through corridors of power, nodding to the guards, as if their presence was expected and unremarkable. Inside, the building was cooler, its high ceilings and thick walls providing refuge from the afternoon heat. A clerk directed him to Wilson's office on the second floor, where the mining commissioner greeted him with the same too-perfect smile as before. "Mr. Phillips, right on time. Please come in." The office was well appointed with large windows overlooking the town square maps of the territory adorning the walls and glass-fronted cabinets displaying mineral specimens. Wilson gestured to a chair in front of his desk, taking his own seat behind it. Now about those investment opportunities. Wilson began producing a folder of documents. We have several promising operations seeking capital for expansion. What followed was a surprisingly thorough and legitimate presentation of mining ventures in the region. Wilson displayed detailed surveys, production reports, and financial projections for copper, silver, and gold mines throughout the territory. If this was a trap, it was elaborately baited. Levi played his part, asking appropriate questions about returns and risks, expressing measured interest in certain properties while finding reasonable faults with others. All the while, his mind worked on the larger problem, how to locate Ellie and Rebecca, how to determine if Clara's whereabouts might be documented somewhere in this building, how to escape if his identity was discovered. These all seem quite promising, Levi said after nearly an hour of discussion. My principals will be most interested. Though I must ask, are there any concerns about stability in the region? I've heard rumors of unrest. Wilson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Rumors are common in frontier territories, Mr. Phillips. I assure you Silver Creek and its surroundings are firmly under control. That's reassuring, Levi replied, though I couldn't help noticing the increased security measures in town. Quite unusual for a peaceful settlement, wouldn't you agree? Merely precautions, Wilson said smoothly. Recent events have necessitated additional vigilance, nothing that should concern legitimate business interests. The emphasis on legitimate was subtle but unmistakable. Levi decided to press further, testing the waters. Of course, though my employers are particularly sensitive to matters of law enforcement after unfortunate experiences in other territories. I understand there was some excitement here recently. An escaped prisoner, was it? Wilson's smile remained fixed in place. A minor incident already resolved. The fugitive in question will soon be returned to justice. He gathered the papers on his desk, clearly bringing the meeting to a close. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another appointment. Please take these prospectuses to review at your leisure. As Wilson handed over the documents, his sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a small but distinctive mark on his inner wrist, a sunburst pattern with 13 rays, the brand of the Dawn Society. Levi accepted the papers, careful to show no reaction to what he had seen. Thank you for your time, Mr. Wilson. Most illuminating. My pleasure, Wilson replied, moving to open his office door. Oh, one last thing, Judge Blackwood is hosting a reception this evening for prominent citizens and visitors. As a representative of Eastern banking interests, your presence would be welcome, 8 o'clock here at the courthouse. The invitation was unexpected, but potentially valuable. A reception would mean access to more of the building, more opportunities to gather information about Ellie and Rebecca's location. I'd be honored, Levi said with appropriate gratitude. Excellent. Until this evening, then. As Levi descended the courthouse stairs, he noted several details he had missed on the way in. A heavy door beside the main staircase, reinforced with iron bands, and guarded by an armed deputy, likely leading to the cells below, where Ellie and Rebecca were held. A separate corridor extending toward the rear of the building, with another guard positioned discreetly at its entrance. And throughout, men who moved with the purposeful vigilance of soldiers rather than the casual authority of lawmen. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square. Levi made his way back to the hotel, alert for any sign that his cover had been compromised. Nothing seemed amiss. No one followed him. No suspicious glances were directed his way. No sudden movements among the guards at the courthouse. Vargas was waiting in Levi's room, having entered through the window rather than the more visible door. His expression was grim. More men have arrived in town, he reported without preamble. 20, maybe 30, coming in small groups from the south. They gather at a warehouse near the rail yard. The Mexican reinforcements, Levi concluded. Earlier than expected. Did you see any sign of their leader? Vargas shook his head. No, but there is talk of an important meeting tonight. The bartender mentioned a reception at the courthouse. I've been invited, Levi said quickly, sharing the details of his meeting with Wilson and the discovery of the Dawn Society brand on the man's wrist. The reception could be our best chance to locate Elian and Rebecca, maybe even find information about Clara. Or it could be the trap closing, Vargas cautioned. This Wilson, he asked too many questions about your business. No. Levi realized, finding it odd now that he considered it. He provided information freely, but asked almost nothing about me or the bank I supposedly represent. Because he already knows, Vargas suggested, or believes he knows. The possibility hung between them, uncomfortable but impossible to dismiss. If Wilson suspected Levi's true identity, the reception could be a carefully orchestrated opportunity to capture him without creating a public disturbance. We need to get word to Henderson, Levi decided. If this is a trap, we'll need his men ready to move. Vargas nodded. I will go return before nightfall. What will you do? Levi moved to the window, gazing out at the courthouse across the square. Prepare to attend a reception, he said grimly, and hope our host doesn't recognize me as the man he tried to hang. What? Night fell over Silver Creek, bringing with it a flurry of activity around the courthouse. Lanterns were lit along the walkways, illuminating the building's facade in a warm glow that belied its true purpose. Carriages and riders arrived steadily, disgorging well-dressed men and women who ascended the steps with the confident air of the privileged. From his hotel window, Levi observed the gathering, identifying faces he recognized from his previous life as a lawman. Bankers, merchants, landowners, the influential citizens of Silver Creek and surrounding communities. Among them moved men whose alert postures and watchful eyes marked them as dawn society enforcers rather than genuine guests. Vargas had returned an hour earlier, having successfully delivered their message to Henderson. The plan was set. Henderson and his men would position themselves around the town, ready to create a diversion if needed. If Levi didn't emerge from the courthouse by midnight, they would assume the worst and move to extract him along with Ellie and Rebecca if possible. It is time, Vargas said, appearing at Levi's side. Unlike Levi and his borrowed finery, Vargas remained in the simple clothes of a servant, a disguise that would allow him to move freely among the household staff at the reception. They made their way across the square, joining the flow of late-arriving guests. The courthouse interior had been transformed for the event, its austere halls softened by lantern light and floral arrangements. A string quartet played in one corner of the main hall, while uniformed servers circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Levi accepted a glass, using it as a prop while he scanned the room. Wilson was there, moving among the guests with practiced charm. Several deputies he recognized from his captivity stood at strategic points, their formal attire not quite concealing the weapons they carried. But of Judge Blackwood, or more importantly, Daniel Reed, there was no sign. Circulate, Levi murmured to Vargas. See what you can learn about the prisoners. I'll work my way toward that rear corridor. Vargas nodded almost imperceptibly and drifted away, blending seamlessly with the servers. Levi began his own careful movement through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with strangers, playing the role of the interested investor, while gradually making his way toward the guarded hallway he had noted earlier. He was halfway to his goal when a stir near the main entrance caught his attention. The crowd parted respectfully, conversations hushing as Judge Vernon Blackwood made his entrance. Tall and distinguished in his black suit, silver hair gleaming in the lamplight, Blackwood moved through the room like royalty among commoners, acknowledging greetings with regal nods. But it was the man at Blackwood's side who froze the blood in Levi's veins. Daniel Reed, his twin brother, his mirror image, or what that image would have been, had their lives followed the same path. The same height, the same build, the same fundamental features that Levi saw in his own reflection. But where Levi's face was weathered by years in the elements, lined by grief and hardship, Daniel's was smooth and pampered. Where Levi's eyes held the haunted look of a man who had lost everything, Daniel's gleamed with the cold satisfaction of power. And where Levi dressed for practicality and concealment, Daniel wore his expensive suit like armor, a declaration of his elevated status. For one terrible moment, Levi feared his brother would look up, would somehow sense his presence across the crowded room. The connection between twins was something they had experienced since childhood, an awareness of each other that defied rational explanation. Would that bond, dormant for 15 years, suddenly reawaken now, at the worst possible moment? But Daniel's attention remained on his conversation with Blackwood and several prominent citizens who had approached them. Levi forced himself to breathe normally, to continue his casual circuit of the room, as if he hadn't just laid eyes on the architect of his family's destruction. As he moved, fighting to maintain his composure, Levi found himself near a cluster of women engaged in animated conversation. Among them was a young woman whose presence seemed somehow discordant with the setting, not in her appearance, which was as refined as any lady present, but in the watchful alertness of her posture, the careful way her gaze periodically swept the room. She was perhaps 23, with honey blonde hair, arranged fashionably, and eyes of a striking blue that reminded Levi painfully of Martha. Something in the curve of her cheek, the shape of her brow, sparked a recognition so profound it nearly undid his careful control. Clara, not the 7-year-old child he had lost, but a young woman grown to adulthood without him. His daughter, he was certain of it, with a conviction that transcended logic or evidence. Every instinct, every fiber of his being recognized her, even as his mind struggled to reconcile the child he remembered with the woman before him. She turned slightly, her gaze passing over him without particular interest, before moving on. No recognition showed in her face. Why would it? She had been a child when he last held her, and now he wore a disguise specifically designed to alter his appearance. To her, he was just another stranger at a society gathering. Levi forced himself to keep moving, though every step away from her felt like tearing open a wound. If Clara was here, if she was alive and apparently accepted in Silver Creek society, what did that mean? Did she know who she really was? Did she remember anything of her life before the fire? Did she know Daniel Reed as her uncle or as something else? These questions whirled in his mind as he continued his careful progress toward the rear corridor. He was nearly there when a firm hand clasped his shoulder. "Mr. Phillips." Wilson's voice carried just enough warmth to seem genuine to casual observers. "I'm so pleased you could join us." Judge Blackwood was just expressing interest in meeting a representative of Eastern banking interests. Washington, it was a summons that couldn't be refused without raising suspicion. Levi turned, fixing his banker's smile in place. "I'd be honored to meet the judge." Wilson guided him through the crowd toward where Blackwood and Daniel stood conversing with a group of local dignitaries. As they approached, Daniel looked up, his gaze falling on Levi with casual interest that showed no sign of recognition. "Judge Blackwood, may I present Harrison Phillips of the First Bank of Boston," Wilson said smoothly. "Mr. Phillips, Judge Vernon Blackwood, our esteemed territorial justice, and Mr. Daniel Forsyth, representing significant mining interests from Colorado." Forsyth, of course, Daniel wouldn't use their shared surname. Levi extended his hand, heart pounding so loudly he was certain everyone must hear it. "An honor, Judge Blackwood, Mr. Forsyth." Blackwood's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Mr. Phillips. I trust you're finding our little community hospitable." "Quite so," Levi replied, keeping his voice modulated to its Eastern cadence. "Mr. Wilson has been most informative about the region's potential." And then he was shaking hands with Daniel, his brother, his enemy, the man responsible for destroying his life. Daniel's grip was strong, his palm smooth where Levi's was calloused. Up close, the resemblance between them was even more pronounced, yet somehow no one seemed to notice. The eye patch, the changed hairstyle, the different bearing, all combined to create a disguise effective enough to fool even his twin. Or so it seemed. "Boston," Daniel remarked, his voice so familiar it sent a shock through Levi despite the years of separation. "I have associates there. Perhaps we know some of the same people." It was a test, subtle but unmistakable. Levi maintained his pleasant expression. "Perhaps, though, my time there has been limited of late. Banking interests require considerable travel." "Of course," Daniel replied with a thin smile. "Travel broadens the mind, they say. I myself recently returned from Denver. The banking community there is quite progressive." Another test, another layer of scrutiny. Levi felt like a man walking across thin ice, each step potentially fatal. "I've found frontier banks necessarily innovative," he answered carefully, though sometimes lacking the stability of more established institutions. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, evaluating. Whatever he might have said next was interrupted by Blackwood, who had been drawn into conversation with another group. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me," the judge said. "Mr. Forsyth, perhaps you could continue acquainting Mr. Phillips with our local opportunities." As Blackwood moved away, Daniel regarded Levi with renewed interest. "Tell me, Mr. Phillips, what brings a Boston banker all the way to Silver Creek? We're hardly the financial center of the territory." "Diversification," Levi replied smoothly. "Eastern markets are saturated. The territories offer growth potential unmatched in more developed regions." "Indeed." Daniel sipped his champagne, eyes never leaving Levi's face. "Though investment always carries risk, especially in unsettled areas." The conversation continued in this vein, a careful dance of probing questions and calculated responses. Throughout, Levi maintained his character, revealing nothing of the rage and grief that boiled beneath his composed exterior. Daniel, for his part, showed no sign of recognizing his brother beneath the disguise, yet something in his manner suggested suspicion, or perhaps just the habitual caution of a man with many enemies. Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of the young woman Levi believed to be Clara. She approached with practiced grace, taking Daniel's arm with the familiarity of a close relation. "Uncle Daniel," she said, her voice sending another shock of recognition through Levi. "You promised to introduce me to the mining commissioner's wife, but she's about to depart." Uncle Daniel. The confirmation of his suspicion was both validation and fresh wound. Clara, alive, grown beautiful, believing Daniel to be her uncle, perhaps believing Levi himself to be long dead. "Of course, my dear," Daniel replied, patting her hand with apparent affection. "Mr. Phillips, may I present my niece, Miss Clara Forsyth. Clara, Mr. Phillips represents banking interests from Boston." Clara offered her hand with a polite smile. "A pleasure, Mr. Phillips. Are you enjoying our little gathering?" Levi took her hand, fighting to keep his own steady, his daughter alive and well, standing before him with no idea of his identity. "Very much so, Miss Forsyth. Silver Creek has been most welcoming. Something in his tone must have caught her attention, for she looked at him more closely, a slight furrow appearing between her brows. Have we met before, Mr. Phillip? Your voice seems familiar. For an instant, Levi considered revealing everything, tearing off the eye patch, calling her by the pet name only he had used, telling her about Martha and the home they had shared. The impulse was so strong he actually swayed slightly, with the effort of restraining it. I don't believe so, he managed to reply. I would certainly remember meeting someone as charming as yourself. Daniel was watching this exchange with sharp attention. Clara has an excellent memory for faces and voices, he said lightly. A rare gift. And occasionally an embarrassing one, Clara added with a self-deprecating smile. I sometimes mistake strangers for acquaintances. Please forgive my presumption, Mr. Phillips. Nothing to forgive, Levi assured her, his heart breaking anew at how poised and lovely she had become in his absence. It's a common enough experience. Daniel glanced at the ornate clock on the wall. Clara, we mustn't keep Mrs. Wilson waiting. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Phillips. Of course, Levi replied with a slight bow. A pleasure meeting you both. As they moved away, Levi noticed Daniel lean close to Clara, speaking quietly in her ear. She nodded, glancing back once at Levi before they were swallowed by the crowd. Had Daniel recognized him? Had Clara's question raised his suspicions? Levi couldn't be certain, but the air of the gathering suddenly felt charged with new tension. He needed to move quickly now to locate Ellie and Rebecca before his cover was irretrievably blown. He made his way to the refreshment table, casually positioning himself near the entrance to the guarded corridor. The deputy stationed there was alert, but not openly suspicious, just another security measure at an event hosting the town's elite. Across the room, Levi spotted Vargas in conversation with another servant, their exchange appearing casual but likely informative. He needed to create a distraction, something that would draw attention away from the corridor, long enough for him to slip past the guard. The opportunity presented itself moments later when a minor commotion erupted near the main entrance. A late-arriving guest had apparently had too much to drink before the reception and was being quietly but firmly escorted outside. As heads turned to observe the disturbance, Levi moved with deliberate purpose toward the corridor, nodding to the guard as if he had every right to be there. Judge Blackwood asked me to check on his private office, he said confidently. Apparently some documents were left unsecured. The guard hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Last door on the left, sir. Levi moved down the corridor, footsteps muffled by the thick carpet runner. The hallway was dimly lit with several doors on either side, all closed, most likely locked. At the end, as the guard had indicated, was a larger door bearing a brass nameplate, Judge V. Blackwood, Territorial Justice. But it wasn't Blackwood's office Levi sought. Henderson had mentioned that Daniel kept his private records in a back room of the courthouse. Where would such a room be located? Not in the public areas, certainly, but somewhere with limited access somewhere. A narrow door beside Blackwood's office caught his attention. Unlike the others, it bore no nameplate, no indication of its purpose. It was also, Levi noted with interest, secured with a heavy iron lock rather than the standard key locks of the other doors. This had to be at Daniel's private sanctum, where he maintained the records of the Dawn Society's operations, and potentially information about Clara. Levi glanced back down the corridor. No one had followed him, but he couldn't count on remaining undiscovered for long. The lock would be a challenge, not something he could pick quickly with the limited tools he carried. He continued to Blackwood's office, finding it unlocked as expected, given the judge's presence at the reception. Inside the room was exactly what one would anticipate for a territorial justice, imposing desk law books lining the walls, certificates and commendations displayed prominently. A connecting door on the far wall immediately drew Levi's attention. It would make sense for Blackwood to have direct access to Daniel's private office, the two men working in concert, one, the public face of law, the other, the hidden power behind it. The connecting door was locked, but with a simple key lock, rather than the heavy iron mechanism on the corridor entrance. Levi retrieved the small set of picks concealed in his boot heel, working quickly to manipulate the lock. It yielded after less than a minute, the door swinging open to reveal a smaller, windowless room beyond. This was unmistakably Daniel's domain. Maps covered one wall marked with locations throughout the territories. Filing cabinets lined another wall, each drawer meticulously labeled. A desk dominated the center of the room, its surface organized with military precision. Levi moved directly to the filing cabinet, scanning the labels. One drawer marked personnel seemed promising. He pulled it open, finding neatly arranged folders alphabetically organized. He flipped quickly through them, looking for anything related to Clara. There, a folder labeled Forsyth C. Levi opened it with trembling hands, finding documents that confirmed his worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. Birth certificate, education records, medical history, all carefully falsified to create a complete identity, for Clara Forsyth, niece of Daniel Forsyth, orphaned at age 6 when her parents died in a carriage accident in Denver. But beneath these public records were others meant for Daniel's eyes only. Notes detailing how Clara had been taken from the burning Reed house, how she had been told her parents were dead, how she had been systematically shaped into a useful asset for the Dawn Society. Daniel had raised her not from familial love, but as a calculated investment, a child with no connections except to him, who could be molded into whatever he needed. The revelation was sickening, but Levi forced himself to continue searching. He needed to find information about Ellie and Rebecca, about where they were being held. A different drawer labeled Current Operations yielded what he sought. A folder containing detention records showed that Eleanor Davidson and Rebecca Martinez were indeed being held in the cells beneath the courthouse, scheduled for enhanced interrogation at midnight regarding the location of remaining evidence. Midnight less than 2 hours away. Levi had to move quickly. He was about to close the drawer when another folder caught his eye labeled Silver Creek Initiative. Inside was the detailed plan Henderson had warned about: the coordinated elimination of anyone who might oppose the Dawn Society's complete takeover of the territory. Names, locations, assigned killers, all meticulously documented with the same precision Daniel had always exhibited, even as a child organizing his toy soldiers for battle. The attack was scheduled for tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours to prevent a massacre. Levi was so absorbed in these discoveries that he failed to notice the sound of approaching footsteps until it was too late. The door to the corridor opened, and Daniel Reed stepped into his private office, stopping short at the sight of his twin brother standing among his most secret files. For a moment, neither man spoke. The shock of recognition passed over Daniel's face, followed by a complex mix of emotions too rapid to identify individually. "Levi," he said, finally, his voice softer than Levi had expected. "I thought it might be you behind that ridiculous disguise." Levi straightened, letting the folder fall closed on the desk. "Daniel," he acknowledged, his own voice tight with suppressed emotion. "You're looking well for a dead man." A smile touched Daniel's lips, sardonic and cold. "I could say the same for you, brother. Though you've aged rather harshly, I must say. Hard living as a fugitive, I suppose." "Hard living after losing everything," Levi corrected. "After watching my home burn with my family inside. After being framed for murders I didn't commit." Daniel closed the door behind him, moving to stand beside his desk. No weapon was visible in his hands, but Levi had no doubt his brother was armed. "Such accusations," Daniel sighed. "Always so quick to judge Levi. That was your flaw as a lawman too, seeing everything in black and white, right and wrong. The world isn't that simple." "Murder is simple enough," Levi replied. "So is kidnapping a child and raising her to believe her father is dead." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Daniel's face. "You know about Clara. Interesting. I wondered if you'd recognize her after all these years." "She's my daughter." "She's my niece," Daniel countered smoothly. "The daughter I never had. I've given her everything: education, security, a place in society. What could you have offered her as a fugitive? A life on the run, poverty and uncertainty." The question cut deeper than Levi wanted to admit. What kind of life could he have provided for Clara while evading the law? What kind of father could he have been while consumed with thoughts of revenge? "You had no right," Levi said, voice low and dangerous. "No right to take her, to lie, to care, to use her as part of whatever game you're playing." Daniel's expression hardened. "This is no game, brother. This is the future of the Western Territories. I'm creating order from chaos, building a structure of governance that will endure long after federal oversight has failed. The Dawn Society isn't just about profit, it's about power. The power to shape a nation. By killing anyone who stands in your way," Levi gestured to the folder on the desk. "By ordering the murder of dozens of innocent people. Necessary sacrifices," Daniel replied without hesitation. "You can't build a new order without breaking the old one. You of all people should understand that, you who enforce laws handed down by distant politicians who never set foot in these territories." Levi studied his brother, searching for any trace of the boy he had grown up with, the young man who had hugged him goodbye before riding off to war. There was nothing, only this cold, calculating stranger who wore his face but shared none of his values. "Where are Eleanor Davidson and Rebecca Martinez?" Levi demanded, changing tactics. "What have you done with them?" Daniel's eyebrows raised slightly. "Ah, so that's why you're here. The Davidson woman and her Mexican stepmother." He smiled thinly. "They're quite safe for now, secure in our cells below, awaiting questioning about certain missing documents. Documents I believe you may have seen." "I know everything, Daniel, about the Dawn Society, about your plans for tomorrow night, about what you did to Martha." Levi's voice broke slightly on his wife's name. "Did you order them burned alive, my wife and daughter?" Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, not quite remorse, but perhaps regret. Martha wasn't supposed to be there, he said quietly. Neither was Clara. The house was to be empty, a message, not a murder. Things went wrong. Things went wrong, Levi repeated, incredulous. That's your explanation for killing your own sister-in-law, for letting me believe my daughter was dead for 8 years. I tried to bring you in afterward. Daniel replied, a hint of genuine emotion finally breaking through his controlled facade. Sent men to find you to explain. You were meant to join me, Levi. We were going to build this empire together, twin brothers ruling the new frontier. The revelation was as sickening as it was illuminating. All this time, then all this suffering, part of some twisted recruitment effort. Daniel had destroyed Levi's life, not purely out of malice, but as a misguided attempt to convert him to his cause. And when I refused to be corrupted, Levi said slowly, you framed me for murder, made me a fugitive. Daniel spread his hands in a gesture of resignation. You left me no choice. You were investigating the very operations I was building. You would have exposed everything before it was ready. The brothers stared at each other across the small office, mirror images separated by an unbridgeable moral chasm. In that moment, Levi understood that the Daniel he had known was truly dead, had died not at Gettysburg, but in the crucible of war and its aftermath, reborn as something colder and harder than the boy who had shared his childhood. It's over, Daniel, Levi said finally. Your plans, your society, all of it. I have the evidence. Henderson has turned against you. By this time tomorrow, federal authorities will know everything. A cold smile spread across Daniel's face. Henderson, of course. I wondered how long it would take him to show his true colors. He moved slightly, positioning himself between Levi and the door. But you're wrong about one thing, brother. It's not over. It's barely begun. With a swift motion, Daniel reached beneath his jacket, drawing a small Derringer pistol. I've prepared for every contingency, Levi. Even the painful possibility of having to eliminate my own twin. Levi tensed, ready to dive aside, but in that instant, the door behind Daniel burst open. Vargas stood there, his own revolver already drawn. Drop it, the Mexican ordered sharply. Daniel's reaction was instant. He spun, firing at Vargas even as he moved. The shot went wide, embedding itself in the doorframe. Before he could fire again, Levi launched himself forward, tackling his brother to the ground. They struggled briefly, Daniel's city-soft muscles no match for Levi's hardened strength. The Derringer clattered across the floor as Levi pinned his brother's arms. It's over. Levi repeated the words, carrying finality. Vargas quickly bound Daniel's hands with a cord from the window drapes. We must hurry, he urged. The shot will bring others. As if to confirm his words, shouts erupted from the direction of the reception hall. The element of surprise was gone. Now they needed to move with speed rather than stealth. The women are in the cells below, Levi said, hauling Daniel to his feet. We'll use him as leverage. Daniel laughed, the sound genuinely amused despite his predicament. You think Blackwood will trade 2 prisoners for me? You don't understand how this works, brother. I'm valuable, but not irreplaceable. The society will continue without me if necessary. We'll see, Levi replied grimly, pressing his own revolver against Daniel's side. Now move. With Vargas leading the way, they forced Daniel into the corridor, heading toward the stairs that would lead to the lower level. Already they could hear the commotion spreading through the courthouse as alarms spread. They reached the stairwell, just as armed deputies appeared at the far end of the corridor. Vargas fired 2 shots, not aiming to hit, but to force their pursuers to take cover, buying precious seconds as they descended into the dimly lit lower level. The cell block was exactly where the records had indicated, a row of iron-barred compartments along a stone-walled corridor. A single guard stood watch, rising in alarm as they appeared with Daniel as their prisoner. Open the cells, Levi ordered it, pressing his gun more firmly against Daniel's ribs. Now, the guard hesitated, looking to Daniel for direction. Do as he says, Daniel instructed, his voice calm despite the circumstances. Open the Davidson and Martinez cells. With reluctant obedience, the guard produced a ring of keys, moving to unlock the 2 cells at the far end of the block. From within, Ellie and Rebecca emerged, both showing signs of rough treatment, but otherwise intact. Ellie's arm was bandaged, confirming she had been the one wounded during their capture. Levi, Ellie gasped, recognition immediate despite his disguise. How? No time, he cut her off. We need to move. He turned to the guard. In the cell, now. Once the guard was secured, they moved quickly back toward the stairs, Daniel still their unwilling guide. The sounds of pursuit grew louder above them. There's another way out, Daniel said suddenly. A tunnel leading from the storage room to the stable behind the courthouse, used for moving prisoners discreetly. Levi exchanged glances with Vargas, both wondering if this was a trap. It's true, Rebecca confirmed unexpectedly. I overheard the guards discussing it. That way. She pointed to a narrow passage branching off from the main cell block. They followed her direction, finding a heavy door that opened onto a long, earthen tunnel dimly lit by occasional lanterns. Moving as quickly as Daniel's bound state would allow, they hurried through the passage, emerging finally into a small stable where several horses were kept ready for official use. Outside, they could hear the commotion from the courthouse as the alarm spread. It wouldn't be long before the entire town was searching for them. "Get mounted," Levi ordered, keeping his gun on Daniel while the others quickly saddled horses. "We ride for the Eastern Pass." Daniel watched these preparations with surprising composure for a captured man. "You won't make it," he said conversationally. "Blackwood has men posted on every trail out of town." "We'll take our chances," Levi replied finally, allowing Vargas to secure Daniel on a horse bound but able to ride. As they led their mounts from the stable into the darkness, beyond a voice called from the shadows. "Wait." Clara stepped forward, a small revolver held steady in her hand. She had changed from her reception finery into riding clothes, her hair now pulled back in a practical braid. "Clara," Daniel began, "go back inside. This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it, Uncle?" she replied, her voice harder than Levi had heard it earlier. "These people, they're the ones you've been hunting, the ones you said were dangerous criminals." Her gaze shifted to Levi, studying him with new intensity. "But he's not a criminal, is he? She hesitated, something like recognition flickering in her eyes. "Who are you, really?" The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility and danger. Levi could hear riders approaching, knew they had only moments before discovery. "Clara," he said softly, his voice stripped of its Eastern affectation, returned to the tone she might remember from childhood. "Your mother's name was Martha. You had a doll named Sadie that you carried everywhere. You were afraid of thunderstorms, and I would tell you stories about brave knights to help you fall asleep during them." Her eyes widened, the revolver wavering in her hand. "That's not possible. My parents died in Denver, in a carriage accident." "No, Clara," Levi continued gently. "Your mother died in a fire at our home in Colorado, a fire set by men working for your uncle. I'm your father, Clara. I thought you had died too until 2 days ago." Daniel strained against his bonds. "He's lying, Clara. This man is dangerous, delusional." "Be quiet," she snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. She turned back to Levi, uncertainty and longing warring in her expression. "If what you say is true, prove it. Tell me something only my father would know." Levi closed his eyes briefly, searching for a memory that would convince her something Daniel couldn't have known or invented. "On your 6th birthday," he said finally, "we took you fishing at Clearwater Creek. You caught a trout bigger than any I'd caught all day. Instead of being proud, you cried because you felt bad for the fish. So we let it go, and you named it Frederick and made me promise we'd come back to visit him." A tear slipped down Clara's cheek, followed by another. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember that day. I remember you." The sound of approaching riders grew louder, breaking the moment. "Clara," Levi said urgently, "we have to go, now, come with us." She hesitated only briefly before nodding, moving to untie one of the remaining horses. "There's a path through the eastern ravine that the patrols don't watch," she said, mounting quickly. "I can show you." With Clara in the lead, they rode out into the night, leaving Silver Creek and the courthouse behind. Behind them, shouts and gunfire erupted as their escape was discovered, but they were already beyond easy pursuit, following a narrow trail that wound through dense brush toward the mountains beyond. As they rode, Levi found himself beside Clara, watching her profile in the moonlight. His daughter lost and found. Living proof that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could survive. The dawn would bring new challenges, getting Daniel, Ellie, and Rebecca safely to federal authorities, exposing the Dawn Society's planned massacre, beginning the long process of dismantling Daniel's corrupt empire. There would be danger, resistance, perhaps even failure. But for now, riding through the Arizona night with his daughter at his side, Levi Reed felt something he had thought forever lost to him. Peace, the ghost that had haunted him for 8 long years, the spirits of vengeance and grief that had driven him across 3 territories began to fade in the starlight, replaced by the promise of justice, reconciliation, and a future he had never dared to imagine. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. Behind lay the shadows of the past, finally giving way to the light of truth. And somewhere in between rode a father and daughter, reunited against all odds, finding their way home through the darkness.